stories that live in the shadows, whispers from beyond, encounters we can't explain. This is Beyond the Veil, where the unknown is never far away.
Hello everybody, welcome back and thank you for joining us once again, Beyond the Veil. I'm Brett Rogers and as always I am joined by Lee Wise.
Good evening.
And on tonight's episode we have a very special guest on the show. For those that don't know, we're from the port town of Hull in the UK, and tonight we're being joined by local Hull historian and paranormal researcher Mike Covell. So good evening, Mike.
Good evening.
Thank you so much for joining us here tonight. We really do appreciate it. We at this stage we don't have the biggest following, so you taking the time to join us when we know how busy you get with lectures, your meetings, your requests for work into researching and documenting the history of the city. It really does mean a lot for you to be here, so thank you very much. But a lot of your work isn't just researching and documenting the history of the city. You also cover a lot of the paranormal and supernatural in and around Hull as well, don't you?
That's right, yeah.
I was going to explain to our listeners a little of your resume, but I think really, so as not to do you a disservice, it's probably best you explain who you are. I mean, we've been on some of your tours and you always give a really good extensive explanation of who you are and what you do. So I'm going to hand it over to you and you can explain to our listeners.
Thank you. I'm a Hull born and bred, local historian, researcher, writer. I've written for newspapers and magazines covering all aspects of Hull's history and the unexplained. I've published 32 books. I've written 150. I've had an international bestseller. I've sold the rights to 4 to Hollywood, and one was an award winner. I've worked on television shows like Most Haunted Live, Paranormal Lockdown, Killer Neighbours, Ouija Dicing with Death, World War II Treasure Hunters, Infinite Monkey Cage, and many, many more. My research on some of the big subjects like the Beast of Barmston Drain, the 1801 Hull UFO, the Humble Monster, they went viral. They were published in newspapers and magazines around the world. They were really big stories. And yeah, I run a business called Amazing Old Tours. We advise on all sorts of projects to do with local history, stuff to do with writing.
I'm going to ask you a few questions about that shortly, but I mean, we've done a few of your tours that you was just talking about doing Hull Amazing Tours, and they're always fantastic. I mean, we obviously come to the ones which are usually to do with the paranormal, and they're always very, very interesting. And I think the great thing that you do is that you go around locations which are reportedly haunted, but you've got the history to back it up as well. And I think that's always the best part of it, is that this was this site, this was that site, this is what happened here, and this is why it's haunted or supposedly haunted. And I think that's always it's the great part of it, isn't it? You know, we've learned so many.
Part of what I really enjoyed is the most recent tour we did with you around the old town of Hull. Is when you're walking around the city, normally you don't look up really, and you miss so much when you don't look up. So many amazing buildings, which you touched upon the history of some. You know, I always remember the beehive outside of the old bank. And it's just not something I'd ever noticed before, no matter how many hundreds of times I'd walked down that street.
And this is it. It gets you looking at buildings like you wouldn't. I mean, we've always been very lucky to have an amazing city with lots of grand architecture. I mean, people who I meet who have visited my work wherever I've been and have stayed over, that, you know, they're not local to Hull, they always say about how many amazing buildings we have and the history that we have. We do have a beautiful city, but then it's always pretty cool as well to know that we've got a beautiful city, but then it's got this really creepy underbelly to it with the ghosts and the spirits and everything. It's always very, very interesting. So if I can just ask you a few quick questions, right? So you also do tours in Beverley, not just in Hull, but you do Beverley as well.
Beverley, Hessel, Cottingham, and then next year we're expanding into Howden. We've been asked by Howden Town Council to go to Howden and start doing them there.
Right.
So I'm just working on that tour at the minute. I've got the route all set up.
Brilliant.
Plenty of stories and stuff. It's just working out the logistics of it. But that'll be March next year.
Brilliant.
So we're expanding.
So that was actually going to be one of my questions then. So first of all, I was going to ask you, what place is more haunted, Hull or Beverley?
That's an interesting one. I'd say Hull.
Yeah.
But when you think about geographical terms, Hull's quite spread out, whereas Beverley's a lot smaller, so it's all sort of crammed into, luckily enough for me, into a route, more or less, through the town.
It's quite
it's quite easy, so it's great for a tour. But I guess it's the same with Cottingham as well, and Hessel. It's because of smaller towns, it's all kind of in a geographical location that's quite small, whereas Hull's quite spread. So I've done tours in places like Sutton, I've done tours in East Hull along the old tracks and stuff like that. I've done tours around the Docklands and things. There's so much history and so many layers. And what I like to do is, I don't like to say to them, this place is haunted. I like to say to them, these are the stories.
Yeah.
And let them make up their own mind, because I think the human mind is a wonderful thing. And I love when people go away and they'll message me and say, I can't get out of my, I can't stop thinking about it. And I like that. I like that element, because then they come back for more. And I can't prove it. We can't prove it. But by saying to people, this is what happened here and stuff like that. And hopefully as well, it'll inspire people to go and do the research and read a little bit further into it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it has for me. I mean, I think one of the first tours we joined you on was the Skullcoats graveyards. Yeah. And you had some great stories for that around there as well.
Such an amazing area.
Yeah.
So much history.
Yeah, we love it.
It's geographically quite a small area. There's so many stories, but depending upon the time of the year when you go, it changes. So if you go in summer, and it's like this lush tropical landscape, but then when you go in winter, it's really quite haunting, and you can see the warehouse graves and all the trees are dying, and it really is quite a special place in Skullcoats.
Yeah, because some of those gravestones you can't see when it's all overgrown, but at this time of year, you can sort of see them poking over the tops of the all the fauna that's dying off and things like that.
We have like a little bit of a saying with I have a small community of friends that do research. And our saying is, we'll come back in February, because everything's dead. Everything's, so you can see stuff. And we do it with World War I research, World War II, all like the bunkers and stuff. You can see them in February because everything's dead. Yeah. There's no nettles. Nettles are like for an historian, nettles are like the arch enemy. Trying to get to a grave and stuff and document it. There's so many nettles.
Yeah, I can imagine. So that's interesting though, because I did wonder with that between Hull and Beverley, because I know that Beverley has some really old buildings to it.
It's got some wonderful stories.
Yeah,
I mean, there's one about a severed pig's head in Beverley over the Beck, which is really bizarre. There's one about an imp that's been seen. There's one about there's a church tower where a woman has seen a creature crawling around it that she said it looked like something out of The Predator, which has always fascinated me. There's one where a guy who, from the English Civil War, he was executed because of his part in the English Civil War, but he's been seen riding a horse through Beverley, which in itself is pretty boring, but the eyewitnesses claim to have seen him in the sky, which is bonkers. There's been stories of black dogs and witchcraft and all sorts of. Beverley is quite, in Hull you've got your ghost stories, but in Beverley it's sort of like a mix. It's like the Avengers, when they open the portals and all the different. It's like that in Beverley. You've got all these different weird and wonderful aspects of the paranormal. There's time slips and UFOs and big black cat sightings and all sorts. Whereas in Hull, it tends to be a bit more, it's a monk. Stuff like that.
Just classic ghost. Yeah.
So to narrow on Brett's question, Brett and I both grew up in Anlaby. We just wondered if you had any good creepy stories from Anlaby.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, a big one that came across my desk must have been about 2012. The Hull Daily Mail had published a photograph of a boy, and they called it the Anlaby Ghost Boy, and it was in this school.
It was at Anlaby School where we attended.
They'd published it, and then the guy at the Hull Daily Mail, who was a friend of mine, messaged me and said, can you look into this? We're going to give you half an hour to look into it. And I said, I don't need half an hour. I'm going to tell you now it's fake. And he said, well, why are you saying that? I said, well, it's a colour photograph, but the boy's black and white. Like, does that mean when I die, will I come back in digital HD or 3D? I said as well, like, the other thing is, when you look at the pixel count of the picture, the boy's pixel count is way different to the picture.
Right.
So anyway, I went away. I googled ghost apps. The first photograph that came up was this little boy, and I was like, "There you go." And I sent it to him. But by then it was in the sun, the star. But it made them look like idiots.
I did the same. I looked at it and I thought, that's so clear that if that's real, then that's just definitive proof that ghosts exist. And I think I did the same. I looked on the app. I don't know if somebody had perhaps commented. I don't know if I'd have just thought to do it, but I looked at this ghost app thing and I saw the same. Remember, it was a sort of Victorian dress boy with a flat cap.
Flat cap, yep.
No, what a shame though.
I'd been the same week. Someone had sent me a photograph from a factory, and it showed a forklift truck with the forks elevated, but the same boy stood on the truck. Like, if he's in a school, fair enough, but he's in a factory. He's on a forklift.
Forklift.
Yeah,
brilliant. So I mean, you mentioned there then. So you cover Hull, Annaby, Hessel, Cottingham, Swanland, Willoughby. But basically all of those villages in and around Hull. But to broaden the question of Hull or Beverley, what would you say is the most haunted village out of Annaby, Hessel, Cot?
Oh, that's a good one. I don't. It depends on the sort of activity. There was one place I went to recently that was off the charts, and I would totally recommend you guys going one night. A place called Roos.
Oh yeah, Roos.
Yeah. So, of course, it's got links to Tolkien.
Right. Yeah.
But we went there one night, and I can spend the night in cemeteries, funeral parlours, castle. Don't bother me. That night I was scared. There was something in that cemetery that just wasn't right. And what had happened was we'd arranged to go to Lely, because there's a story called the Lely Boggle, which is supposedly this nature spirit that people have seen over the years. So we were going to investigate that, and we got to Lely, and it was really foggy. You couldn't see anything. And for some reason, the local pub had like a funeral on. So it was a really sort of macabre, strange evening. So we was like, just out of respect, we'll go elsewhere. So we went to Roos into the churchyard, and it was just creepy. It was foggy. And they have a really old gravel entrance with this old metal gate. And it was the middle of the night, we had this metal gate. And we heard these footsteps on the gravel. And we all dashed over to see who it was, thinking it was someone, saying, get out. And there was no one there.
Ooh.
So already, we're all on edge. And I remember the group I worked with a guy called Matt, who was like a Viking. We had a guy called Callum with us. There were like 6 or 7 of us. We all had our equipment and our cameras. And we were all separate at one point, but little by little, as the night progressed, we got closer and closer. And I remember myself and Matt saw this weird light on this gravestone that we couldn't account for. Just kept flashing like rainbow colours every now and again. There was nothing in the area because it's quite a rural cemetery. And I remember Callum came up to me at one point and he said, I'm really, really scared. And I said, why are you scared? And he said, because I've never seen you two scared. And that's got to me. He said, I've never seen you two act like this. And it was really weird. And I remember at one point I backed myself into a wall against the church and just pulled my hood up and put my arms across my chest and closed my eyes just to see if I could fit. And it just felt weird. And all of us that night experienced stuff. Everyone's chest felt weird. And it was so bizarre. And at one point we found ourselves outside the cemetery and was like, we've just moved out of the cemetery because we were experiencing that much going on. We just felt uncomfortable. And we were stood at the back of the cemetery like, we've come here for this. We should really go in and do this. And it was just a really weird night. So Roos is quite, and it's beautiful as well.
Yeah.
During the day, it's gorgeous. They've just erected the new Tolkien statues there. So it's worth a road trip just for that.
We might have to take a drive out there then, yeah.
So that Roos has always been a place that I've visited quite a lot throughout the years. But as well, I mean, Paul, I've experienced a lot of stuff in Paul, not just at Fort Paul, but at the church nearby and in the woodlands around it. Had a lot of activity out there throughout the years. Sutton, in Sutton itself, the shipping has had a lot of activity, but on the track that leads out of Sutton, you've got the White Lady story, you've got monks at Castle Hill, ghostly monks. People have had a ghostly train going up and down the track and all this type of stuff. So I spent a lot of time out there and never lets me down. We always get something. I remember one night we were on a stretch of track between Tweendykes and Sutton. And unbeknown to me, in the past month, I've only just uncovered this, but a guy was beheaded down there by the railway. We think maybe it was suicide. And, but we didn't know that at the time. We were there because of the white lady story. Apparently, if you go to the bridge and chant white lady, I killed your white baby, she follows you. So we was at the bridge doing this, and we'd been chanting, and not a lot was happening. So we started to retreat a little bit, and we heard like chains clanging and like metal banging against metal. And then all of a sudden on the track, those lights come on and stay on all night, but they just turned off one by one, getting towards us. And then we just did this almighty crash. We had all these dogs howling like something was kicking off, and we just beat a hasty retreat and just got the hell out of there.
Oh, that just gave me goosebumps.
Yeah, it was such a weird night. Like,
wow.
You could say, oh, maybe it was a power cut, or maybe it was something natural upsetting the dogs. Maybe it was someone putting the bins out. But for it all to just happen at the same time,
like that's it, just all built into that one.
All at once, it was like, whoa. Like,
we've discussed this, haven't we? Like, ardent skeptics are just as bad, if you like, as absolute ardent believers, because they come up with such wild explanations for things.
We said this in the last episode.
itself becomes more ridiculous than the story.
Yeah. Well, like I was saying, like, who's going to be out at this time of the night doing stuff like that? Surely out of respect for your neighbours, you won't be clanging about with metal and chains and stuff like that. The fact that all the dogs had gone crazy, the lights had gone. And I remember that people were taking photographs and they were getting faces on the cameras in the trees. And I remember we were debating this, whether or not it was simulacra, if it was, Matrix in, or if, or if it was something genuine. But it all stacked up. And, and it was just, when you're there yourself and you feel it.
Yeah.
That to me is compelling as well, because if it had just been all that, we'd have probably just been stood there, but it just made us feel weird.
And there's a lot to be said for those inner feelings, that voice telling you, like, this is not
it's
right.
That fright or flight, and dates right back to when we were cavemen and hunting and stuff. But so that Sutton's quite an interesting place.
Wow, honestly, that story just gave me goosebumps everywhere. 100%. Yeah, that's incredible. So I mean, and where does your jurisdiction, so to speak, where does that like? Because you just said about like Howden now, but where do you generally cover at the moment then?
In terms of research or tours? Researched not right up to North Yorkshire.
Right.
So I've done as far as Whitby.
Wow.
I've written. They've not been released yet, but I've got manuscripts on Whitby, Scarborough, North Yorkshire. I've done a lot of stuff in York. None of that's been released yet. But I travel out there a lot. I've some of the worst. We were talking about public transport before we started.
Yeah.
I did a day where I was researching in Scarborough. I'd gone to take 5 photographs of 5 locations, and the train was delayed by an hour. So I got on the bus, which took maybe 3 hours to get to Scarborough. And by the time I got there, I'd been travelling 6 hours. And Scarborough's down. I could have walked there in that time.
Yeah, you could.
I remember I got there and it was a weather warning. Like, I was getting text messages and updates saying that it's going to get really bad. And I found myself on an open top bus bombing down Scarborough seafront. The waves coming in with the wind, and I've never been happier. Wow. And I got my 5 photographs that I needed. I went back to the train station and went to get a train ticket. And she said, "Look, I'll be totally honest with you, it's not worth it." She said, like, it cost you 19 quid for a return ticket. But if you're getting a single, it's going to cost you 19 quid. And she was like, "But if you download this app," and I was like, "Look, sweetheart, I've had the worst day. It just rained constantly. It's been thundering and lightning.
I've been on an open top bus in the ocean.
The roads were flooded all the way in. The transport took 6-7 hours just to get here. I just want to go home. Just take my money and just let me get on that train."
I know you tried it well.
Yeah.
Fantastic. No, well, I mean, actually, that's quite interesting that you mentioned York, because I mean, York is obviously so well known for its paranormal activity as well.
It certainly is. Yeah, I spent quite a lot of nights in York. I've spent time at the Golden Fleece. I've researched the Golden Fleece to the point where if you go to the Golden Fleece in York, there's a plaque on the wall, and every paranormal group that goes in there treats that as gospel. And I was like, hold up, let's research these stories. So I went away and researched it. Rubbish.
Really?
Yeah, one of them, a Canadian airman called Jeff Monroe died in the building.
Yeah.
Absolute rubbish.
That's the standard one you get on the ghost walk.
It was from Doncaster.
Yeah.
Like, Doncaster's not as nice as Canada.
Well, not really.
It was a gunner called Gerald McTierney, and he fell out a window because he'd been drinking. So if we get rid of that story, all them people that have gone in there and picked on the Canadian airman and picked up on him, they're all chatting a lot of crap.
Oh,
And I published that story about 2015, I think it was, in Haunted magazine. Only the last year, paranormal groups in York have gone, oh yeah, that's right. You know, and I remember last year there was a big hoo-ha because this paranormal group in York, they'd published it and said, we found the truth. And they got all this newspaper coverage, and I was like, whoa, like, I published that like a decade ago. Like, and the next day, my lad rang me up and he was like, Dad, you're all over the place in York. Like, people are talking about you all over the place. What's going on? So, because they've published my findings. So there's a lot like that in York where there's these wonderful stories. And they've got beautiful archives in York. It's gorgeous. Like one of them with old wooden panels, walls and bookcases and proper old book smells. So I go there a lot, spend a lot of time. That's right near the bus station. So you can go through and spend hours and hours researching these stories. And it's the same with Scarborough. They've got a wonderful archive. I went to Scarborough and I had a list of ghost stories I wanted to research in Scarborough, Scarborough Castle and things like that. And I went to the archives and the lady said to me, we've got this file. And it was like that. And I just give her a bundle of cash and just said, photocopy everything. I'll have a copy of everything. And she said, Bob, we can scan it and email it to you. It don't cost you a penny. Oh, sassy, I'll have that back then. Email it on. So while I was there, I was like, right, what have you got on UFOs? What have you got on big black cats? What have you got, sea monsters? And just got them to scan all this research and send it to me. And it opened up so many new avenues of research for locations and stuff like that. And that was wonderful. So I've been quite lucky in that respect, researching right around North Yorkshire. But we're quite blessed in our area. The archives are amazing. If you're willing to go and do the legwork, there's some amazing stuff to be found.
I think that's it, isn't it? I think if you've got to have the patience for it, I mean, you've definitely got to have a system of, and the patience of methodically going through everything and documenting everything that is relevant to what it must be. I don't know how you do it, to be honest with you, because I would want to be able to get exactly what I want there and then. I don't think I could pour over everything. But you've got to have a mentality for that.
I call them eureka moments when you're looking for a story. Because one of the things, my belief is that ghosts are the spirits of dead people. So if you've got a location, I look at the history to find deaths, murders, suicides. So when you found out there's been deaths there and tragedies and stuff like that, I was researching a pub this week in the city centre, and I found not only that previous occupants of the building before it was a pub had died, when it was a pub, several landlords had died, but also they used to have inquests there where they'd bring dead bodies in for a jury to sit and look at the body and argue and debate on how it died. So you've got all that linked to that building, but no one's ever researched it or published it. You know, and so all that information, it's weeks and weeks of just trawling through the newspapers and looking for the stories.
Are you at liberty to share what location that is?
Old English Gentleman.
Really?
Yeah, beautiful pub. So, but yeah.
You was only talking about that. You met up there the other day, didn't you?
Other day, yeah, I was there the other day. So, but like, I always try and visit them when I'm researching them. And I always try and talk to the staff and the management and the landlords and landladies, because you get stories off them as well. They'll tell you things that they've experienced. And one of the things that gets my foot in the door in terms of investigating, I'll always say to them, can I spend a night and in return I will give you the full history of the building. You could do whatever you want with it. You can make a display, you can turn it into a booklet, and 99% of the time they'll say, all right.
Wow.
And it's got my foot in the door in so many wonderful buildings. You'd be amazed at the places I've been in the city.
It's a good trade. And they've got the full history.
They've got the history, yeah. And of course, as well, whenever they get these other groups in, and they're, I'm picking up on a dead policeman, or, they can say, actually.
Yeah. Don't talk shit. Yeah.
What's your take on, because one of the most famous or infamous ones in York is the chap in the cellar who saw the Roman Legion?
Yeah, because that's a major... Harry Martindale was a plumber, a plumber's apprentice, and he'd gone down there to fix the pipework, and heard this noise while he was up a ladder, turned round and seen this Roman Legion Now it transpires that he wasn't the only witness to this. There's been other witnesses, so he's not on his own. But as well as that, they did an archaeological dig in the cellars and found an old Roman road, so it backs up his theory. The other thing is that he described them in such a manner, none of the historians had ever seen them dressed in this manner. And it was only afterwards they uncovered archaeological evidence that backed up that sighting. And apparently it was a legion that had been beat and they were on the way back into York, which of course at the time was I can't even say it. Yeah. So he'd seen that. And what was amazing about that is when I was a young lad, my dad was an industrial cleaner and he was involved in going into old buildings and stuff like that, and he would take lagging off pipes and things, and he'd worked there. And he'd said to me one of his colleagues had been down in the basement and had heard this sound, what sounded like a legion walking through. And he told me this story for years and years and said, oh yeah, we'd worked there and we wouldn't go down by ourselves, we'd go down in groups, everyone was terrified of it and this, that and the other. And he used to tell me stories about buildings. Like we'd be going by Lady LaGrosse in Beverley, which is gone now.
Yeah.
I remember every time we went by on the bus, he'd say to me, it's haunted, that place. And for years I was just like, yeah, whatever, Dad. But then in my research, I've uncovered stories in the archives where people have talked about seeing ghosts and landladies and landlords have seen stuff. So, I used to take his stories with a pinch of salt, but now they're getting backed up by other evidence as well. So
Wow.
It's quite compelling, the idea that, he wouldn't have known to even make up the idea of what they were dressed in.
The thing is about Martindale as well, he went on to be a police officer.
Yeah.
So he was a very reliable, well, there was back then.
Sort of, there was.
Yeah. Well, wow, yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, as you say, the fact that he would make that up and then they found this road there and
all the archaeological evidence.
I mean, either that is just one of the biggest coincidences ever to have existed, or there is some fact there, isn't there? Yeah. I mean, we'll back this up a little bit anyway. So, like, how did you find yourself to be Hull's historian? I mean, is that like an official title, or is it just
people have called me also? That's a nice title compared to some of the things I've been called. So what happened was 19 years ago, I was diagnosed with a critical heart condition, and I was told I was going to die, and I was told that I needed to get a hobby between heart operations and stuff like that, and meet appointments and stuff. And at the time, I remember my dad had this massive local history collection of books, and I'd go around to his house and just sit and read, and I read them all. And then Oldness Road Library at the time, which was quite close to my house, they had like support groups where you could go. And I remember walking in and seeing they had 2 shelves of local history stuff, and I'd just go in with my library card and just get 8 titles out a week, then the next week another 8, and just work my way through. And I remember saying to her, I've read everything. And she was like, we have a local studies library in the city centre, which was at the time was in Central Library. And I walked through the doors, and when I walked in, a friend of mine who I went to college with was working there, and he was like, what are you doing in here? And I was like, well, I'm thinking of writing a book about ghosts in Hull and another book about Jack the Ripper's connections to Hull. And he was like, there is no connections to Hull. And sure enough, I found 14 suspects with links to Hull, numerous Ripper letters mentioning Hull, numerous Ripper scares, and then all the ghost stuff as well. And originally, I started posting stuff on a website called This Is Your Mail, which was run by the Hull Daily Mail. And that got the attention of the guys at the Hull Daily Mail, so they would put my stuff in the Hull Advertiser, and then it led to a job with the Hull Daily Mail working with them freelance. So it just grew from there, and of course, the more people wanted to write, the more you go and research. And I just ended up with so much information, and I remember thinking there's big gaps in our learning where we just don't know stuff. And I just went after that. I just, pursued all that. I've researched stuff with World War II and published stuff that's never been seen before. I've discovered, stuff about haunted buildings, pubs, clubs, hotels, inns, restaurants, all sorts that's never been published. But at the same time, it's helped debunk a lot of the nonsense stories that have come out. And I've come under fire a lot from people. years ago, not so much now, touch wood, I used to get a lot of hate mail. I used to have death threats and all sorts. Yeah.
Oh, Jesus
You
Christ.
grow up believing a ghost story that your parents and your grandparents have, and then I come along and say, well, hold up, it's not true. Reverend Yates, when I've told you that one on the Ghost Walk, that was a story that was believed for years. It was published in loads of books. Then I came along and spent months in the archives to try and back up that and couldn't. So I ended up debunking it. And when I debunked that, I got people emailing me saying, they're calling me, I can't say it, but nasty names, because I've debunked this story. So
Wow.
I think that's just bizarre, because even if you have grown up believing a certain story, and we've all done it, no matter what it is, whether it's about UFOs, anything paranormal, you grow up and you believe it. If it then turns out to be debunked, you still enjoy the story, and you still enjoyed the story. And I just think it's no different from enjoying a purposely written fictional tale. You still enjoy
the way I see
just because it's not real.
Now you tell your kids that story, you can tell them that story, then add that bit on the end. That's a new part of the story. But yeah, people.
Well, what a shame. I mean, because if you debunked something that had been passed, through my granddad and my mum or something like that, I'd be like you just said there, this was a tale that they used to tell me. It turns out it's not true, but they used to tell me that as a kid, and it was an incredible story. It used to scare me or whatever. But it's just another, like you said, it's another part of it. What a shame that people would feel so strongly about it. I
had people approaching my kids at school, and people saying to my kids, "Your dad's a fraud." Well, I'm an historian. I deal in historical fact. How can that be fraudulent? Surely the people
story that I believe is true.
Yeah, surely the people that are claiming the story, they're the frauds. So, but yeah, people were saying that, because I remember one day my daughter came home. She was like, "I'm not friends with this girl anymore because her mum said you're a fraud."
Wow.
Like, what? So,
oh my God, people are so
never guessed a sort of local historian would get.
Oh God, I've had
such heat.
Yeah, I had somewhat. Yeah, I've had a lot. Yeah.
Oh my God,
sure.
that is bonkers. That so this might sound a little intrusive, but there might be some people that want to sort of understand how is this an occupation then? I mean, are you paid by somebody to do this?
This is a full-time job. So my income comes from amazing old tours. So that comes from lectures. It comes from the tours. I go into schools, colleges and universities and talk about history. But as well as that, at one point there was an income from the books. That's not there anymore because you can't get the books anymore, but you will be able to soon because I'm working on new editions. And also magazines as well. People would approach me for newspapers and magazines, so there was an income there. So yeah, it pays. Obviously, we've just passed my busiest time. October was phenomenal. I had a really busy period where, one night in Cottingham I did 3 tours in one night and they were all fully booked. Another night I did 2 in Hessel, they were all fully booked. I had a tour in Beverley, I had a couple of tours in Hull. I was lecturing 2 or 3 times a day. So I had a really, really good month. And at this time of the year, it kind of changes over. So, people come from private organisations for the Christmas parties. They'll come and have a staff night out where we'll have food and drink and then we'll go looking for ghosts. So yeah, and it's great. It's good because you can set your own hours. I work when I want to work. Even though I work a lot, I don't really stop. And I get to meet so many wonderful people. If you can imagine, every day you're with a different group. And I love it. And it makes a change from what I was doing. I was working in retail management for quite a while. So yeah, it's an amazing job.
No, I think that's great. And it's good that the people that you're going to meet are going to be people that they're not there to ridicule. They're not there to cause trouble. They have an interest and a genuine interest, sort of something that you share. I think the fact that you're going to surround yourself with people like that on a regular basis, that's fantastic, isn't it?
And I think what's really great is, even though I am on the believer side of things, if I came and did one of your tours and I was a complete non-believer, not really interested in paranormal, even though we came on the paranormal one, there's enough history that even that alone is great, really good fun, really interesting. So that's good. But I've found I mean, I know we've only started out with the podcast very recently. You only got very few listeners so far, but it's opened up a lot of conversation. So I'll speak to people at work, and me and Brett have discussed this quite a lot, is everybody's interested in this. People are just not always that keen to show that they're interested, because I think people fear ridicule. And but since we started this, the amount of people who I've thought, no chance would that person be interested in this, to tell you to bugger off with the nonsense, have been fascinated, even saying, actually, I've got some stories for you that they're going to share. So that's really fascinating, and I think you'll know better than me, Mike, but I think the general interest, or the people willing to show that they're interested and come along to these tours and even go on the ghost hunts we've been on, I think the numbers have gone up since we started doing those.
Yeah.
And you more frequently see ones sold out. You know, you go to get a ticket and it's like, oh,
yeah,
tickets are gone. So I think it's really good, and probably the more people do it and realise you don't get ridiculed for having this interest, then the more people will do it as well.
Yeah.
Because I think the vast majority of people are fascinated by this stuff,
whether
they admit it or not.
Well, even on that last one we was on, there was a couple of people there who, you know, you asked that question, who's the skeptics? You had people who still shot their hand up, but it's because there's still something in it for them, because they get the history. You know, it's like, if you don't want to believe the ghost stories, that's fine, but there's still some amazing history to learn about the city. And it's just a great combination of the two, and it's so perfectly done, because you get to learn some incredible history that you never would have learned before unless you probably went on these tours or you did the work yourself. And then you get the ghost stories. You're not telling them to believe it.
And it's light-hearted as well. I like to have a bit of a laugh. I have a really wicked, cheeky sense of humour. Because I think you've got to. I think you can't take it too seriously. Because at the end of the day, a lot of the stories involve death and murder and suicide, and they're not nice. And I like to always mention the victims' names as well. So I talk about the victims a lot. You know, so their names get mentioned. So in a way, we're paying our respects to them and things like that.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, so was the intention when you started doing this, was it always the intention to tie in the paranormal? Or did you sort of think that, okay, well, I've started with history, but then I'm uncovering the paranormal, and or was that always was it your intention to always bring in the paranormal into your work?
It was originally set up for kids. Amazing Old Tours was established for children, because my idea was, by using digital technology, taking them around with a tablet and showing them all these old pictures, they would learn. And my idea was, I can sell this to schools. So I originally started off with a World War II tour, like a local history tour. And then I thought, at that time, a good friend of mine, who's passed away now, bless him, but Keith's daddy was doing the Old Town Ghost Walk. And he's retired. And me and him was really good mates. And he sort of said to me, why don't you bring it back? So that was one of the tours I wanted to do. And then I thought, there's stuff in the city centre as well, Prospect Centre, and I can do like a city centre ghost walk. So I started off with like 4 tours aimed towards sort of families, and it just grew from there, really.
Wow. Yeah, that's great though. I mean, because that's what I always thought was, like, you know, did it just start with the history, but then you started uncovering all these ghost stories, and then that just sort of filtered in, or was it always like a big interest for you that you found this way to tie the two
I had
together?
like a clear vision that I wanted to tell ghost stories, because that's what I like doing. You know, that's the thing I love. You know, I wanted to do it right. I wanted to do it so that people aren't getting full of stupid ideas, because there's people that tell people stories that just aren't true. Fanny Adams being one of them, which we talked about on the tour. So I wanted to debunk a lot of the daft stories, but give them the real stories and the history and things like that people had experienced. And the research that goes into them. I mean, one of the venues we talk about is Manchester Arms, which we talk about Margaret Goy. But the research that went into that, there's maybe 60, 70 pages of research that have gone into that one story. And you think that, I don't even know how many venues we visit, but that night we do maybe 40, 50 venues. So there's a lot of research that goes into it, you know, and people don't realise that. People just think that you've got the story. But I spent hours and hours going through the old newspapers and the trade directories and the polling books and the electoral roll and the census, building up a timeline of every single venue, just so we've got that information. Spend a lot of time and building up the stories. And
I think it's always the way, isn't it? You know, people don't, you know, just take it for granted that you just rock up and you tell these stories, and only because they get this 5-10 minute snippet of history, that these didn't take hours and hours,
Oh, yeah.
potentially days
Well,
worth
like
of
I said,
research.
the grammar school story for Reverend Yates, that took 6 months of research because they have that many documents in the archives, and it just meant going in every day and just going through 30 or 40 pages and going back the next day and going through another 30 or 40 and just doing that until you've ruled everything out. And it's just that due diligence, and a lot of people don't realise that. I remember a few years ago, a guy was writing a book about ghosts in Hull, and it was quite a popular book. It came out, you can still get it in Waterstones, but it put a post, it sent a letter to the Hull Daily Mail saying, I'm coming to Hull to research the story. I'm going to spend a day in the history centre. So I went to meet him, and he wasn't in the archives, and he wasn't in the local studies, he was in the cafe. And I'm just thinking, this book's going to be terrible. When it came out, it had so many mistakes in it.
Oh no!
And then what it was, he just met people and got their stories, and wrote them down as factual. But I mean, he wrote about Reverend Yates, that was in there. But one of my favourite stories, he said that Barmston Drain was haunted by a little boy that was beheaded by a sailboat when the sailboat went back down Barmston Drain. You'll know yourself, it's got fixed bridges. You can't get a sailboat in Barmston Drain. But because he'd not been there and not done his due diligence, it failed miserably.
I think the fact that you put sailboat and drain together instantly tells you that that's nonsense.
No, but yeah, he's written that as a true ghost story.
Oh my God.
And that is what you get without the research. And
Yeah.
all
But then people will buy that and read that and believe that and tell their kids, and then they'll tell their kids and they'll just get regurgitated.
Oh God, honestly, and it's a shame that because it dilutes the quality of work that someone like you does. Because then these people are selling books, and it's we're selling these books, and these are all great, true ghost stories. And it's like, yeah, but they're not, and it just dilutes the quality of your work. So that's really unfortunate as well, isn't it? But yeah, well, some people don't seem to mind, do they? But so of your tours, they're incredible, they really are. But of the haunted locations that you go to in these tours, do you have a particular favourite, and why?
So Royal Station Hotel is one that I love. I mean, it's not open anymore, but I used to go there quite a lot. It was always so active. Just every night that I went in there, something would happen. So many wonderful stories, shared experiences with other people, other groups that I'd taken there. So much activity, such a wonderful, and of course the history is beautiful. That place I love. Hull News Theatre is another one. I've never had a dull night in there. I've had so many experiences in there.
Incredibly haunted.
Yeah, where it's so dark as well, because of that building is meant to be an enclosed building, so you can see the performance. But on a night when everything's closed, it's pitch black, and it's just so you can't see your hand in front of your face.
Wow.
And I've had some amazing experiences in there. In terms of pubs, I love the George Hotel. It's one of my favourite venues. So much history, such a beautiful building. I've been up in the loft. I've been down in the cellar. I've been in the smallest window room. I've just searched that place top to bottom, looking for answers and stuff. One of the funnest ones we had was we did Dram Shop, and I'd got into my friend was the landlord at the time, and he'd experienced some stuff. But also as well, I don't know if you know this, underneath Dram Shop, there's like a network of tunnels, and they're not really big. They just sort of run around the edge of the building, and we believe they were put there during World War II as a shelter. And I'd gone to meet him, we'd gone down and looked, and I was like, this is amazing. And I took some pictures, and my friend at the Old Daily Mail said, can we come and do an article, and we'll get you and Paul down there and we'll take pictures. And they sent a guy called Peter from the Hull Daily Mail who he's photographed me hundreds of times. We've worked together on loads of stories, but he don't believe. He's a non-believer. And we'd gone down into the cellar, and we'd gone into the bit where the tunnels are, and he said, I want to take some pictures of you. And we'd walked right to the back of the tunnel, and there was this really old wooden door, so all the paint was flaking off. So we got a picture with me and Paul stood near it, and he basically said, you've got to hold the flash. So when I take the picture from there, the flash will illuminate you two. So he's right at the back of the tunnel, and while he's down there, you can hear knocks, bangs, taps, footsteps. And he's like, guys, what's that noise? And I'm like, well, we're the only people down here. So, like, what can it be? And Paul was there, and he was like, well, it's not from the pumps. It's not from any of the equipment. Doesn't make any of that noise. But the thing is about the tunnel, it was like that deep in mud because it's when it rains, all the rainwater goes in. And I was kind of saying to Pete, like, if it kicks off, you've not got a torch because we've got your light illuminating us. So if it kicks off now and you get scared, you're screwed. Like, and he's down there, like, getting quite like, guys, seriously, what is this banging? I don't know, mate. So that was just so much fun being down there. We did a night in I forget it. It's a club on Beverley Road. What's the name of it?
Welly.
No, before Welly. They do rock nights and stuff.
Oh, it's the one directly on the opposite side of the road, isn't it? Do you mean that one?
I can't remember the name of it. Darren Bunting runs it. Oh, I can't remember the name. But it is a club. But so they asked us to do a night in there for I think it was when Kingston FM was around or someone like that. And we'd gone into the cellars, and in the cellars, it was two Victorian houses that had been converted into a big Victorian townhouse. But in the cellar was where obviously the servants would have stored stuff. So when you go down there, the atmosphere changes completely. It's all bare brick. You can see where the old staircase was. And staff had seen these weird red flashing lights. And he was like, can you go down? And so I took the team down from the radio. They were quite scared. And we were down there, and sure enough, you could see these red flashing lights. And it was just so freaky. And then I realised what they were. They were on the front of the building, they have air bricks. And because you're under the ground and these air bricks are at eye level, you can see all the brake lights on passing cars. And it was great to turn around and say, actually, it's something quite mundane. But I remember we climbed out and we got back to like ground level, be at the bar. And I don't have a lot of hair. I came out and it was like I had a big white afro. And there was just so many spiders webs and cobwebs. And just like you're just walking through it and you don't realise at the time. But so that was quite an interesting. O'Reilly's.
Oh yeah.
So that was quite an interesting property to research. But there's been so many. I mean, I've done stuff in nightclubs, in hotels, after hours in certain pubs and stuff and theatres. And it's just there's so many wonderful locations in Hull, and so many surreal ones. You know, when I've been in venues where I'm doing it and I'm thinking this is mad. Like, this is crazy. I remember we did one at Hull New Theatre, and I won't say what characters there were because there might be children listening, but we were told not to take photos behind the scenes. And it was the middle of the night, and I'm walking through and I see this body suspended. And I'm like, what the hell? I got my torch out and shone it, and it was a character from a popular children's TV show. And what it was obviously when they're on stage, they put these costumes on. And then he took us to these boxes, and there was like boxes of the characters' heads.
Oh yeah.
But it was real surreal, like looking at it's midnight, you're looking in, and it's just like a face looking back at you, and you're like, oh my god.
Oh no, that would have that's like stuff out of nightmares.
Yeah, it was creepy.
Yeah,
you know, because you've seen these things on TV, you know, and kids grow up and they love them. Yeah. Then you see the other side, the flip side. So that was quite creepy.
Yeah, just loitering around in the darkness. That sounds pretty eerie.
Yeah, so we've mentioned your books, Mike. Know that you've written on a really broad range of topics, from Hull's history, paranormal, Jack the Ripper suspects, Link to Hull, folklore, urban legends, and even UFOs. Before we touch on those topics, we were just wondering about your process of writing your books. How long roughly would a book generally take you to finish?
Well, it depends. Sometimes I can just sit and write. I do about 10,000 words a day. It depends on the subject. If I'm really, really engrossed, I will just sit for hours. And some days I've sat for like 14, 16 hours just writing. And I've got to a point where I don't need to look at my screen now. So I'll put a movie on. Yeah. I'll sit and watch a TV show, binge watch a box set while I'm writing. So it depends on the process, but usually what I'll do is I'll spend a month or so researching, and by that I mean I'll go for like the British newspapers, the National Archives, then I'll go to things like Old History Centre, East Riding Archives, and if it's a bigger one, York or Scarborough or Leeds, or so there's like a research period, and then I'll start typing everything up, and it's the typing up that takes the longest.
Yeah.
So usually it'll be a couple of months typing up. But yeah, all in all, I'd say maybe 2 or 3 months of solid writing. But people are amazed. People will message me and say, what's your word count, or how many pages of research have you got? And I was working on a book last week, and my friend messaged me and said, how many pages of research have you got? And I said, I've got 50 pages of research to type up. And they were like, how long's that going to take you? And I was like, how long's a piece of string?
Yeah.
And then 3 days later, I messaged them and went, finished. And they were like, what? And I was like, yeah, I've done it.
Yeah.
Because I just sat and just really, really gone at it. And I have days where I just completely close myself off and just sit and write. And I have a really small laptop, and I have a tablet, and everything's connected to a cloud. So I can sit on the bus and write a chapter, and by the time I get home, it's saved. And things like that. So I'll often find if I'm going on a research trip, I'll travel there typing up last week's research, get that research, and on the way back on the train or the bus, I'll type it back up again. And so it's pretty much done. And technology is amazing now. You can do it on your phone or all sorts. So yeah, and I love the process of researching and writing. Yeah. So.
Do you have any? I mean, it's an amazing achievement to write one book. But do you have a particular book that you're most proud of?
It's difficult, really, because I guess I'm proud of them all in certain ways. Like the Marfleet Murder one was one that opened a lot of doors for me, really, because that was the one that got seen by Most Haunted. That was the one that I sold the rights to Hollywood. Never made any money off it, but that was the one that opened up a lot of doors and got a lot of people's attention, and still does. So I was really, really proud of that one, and it took so long to write because I was just typing up every day I'd be sat there writing. So that one was a really, really big one to finish.
Yeah.
I remember I finished a book about Frederick Billy Demon, which was called Jack the Ripper or Worse. Demon was a fraudster, bigamist, a multiple murderer, serial killer, not a very nice man. And I remember when I finished that one, it kind of debunked every single book that had come before it and rewrote the history on Demon. So I was really, really proud of that.
Yeah.
It led to a TV show with Prospero Productions, which went out and won loads of awards. And then at one point, Beverly FM got in touch and said, we'd love to do a serialization of this book. And they said, we're going to read it over the next few weeks and try and work out. And I remember the lady that was working on it, she called me up and she said, can you come to Beverly for a meeting? I said, yeah. And I was really panicking, like, what's going on? And when I got there, she said, I'm going to be totally honest with you, we've got to drop the project. And I was heartbroken. I said, can I ask why? And she said, it's one of it was one of the most evilest people I've ever read about. And I don't think we can tell his story without doing it justice. But the listeners will hate him so much that it might just be no one will want to listen to it.
Yeah.
And she said, I was that put off by how evil he was. I've took your book and I've locked it in my garden shed. She said, I refuse to have it in the house. Huh? So I said to her, can you put that as a review on Amazon? Yeah. Because I will sell a ton of books. So I was really proud of finishing that one.
A book so bad I can't have it in the house.
Yeah,
that's a tagline.
He was such an evil man. Yeah, he was such an evil, sinister guy. So really, really proud of that one. One of the books that I have finished, I've basically written 150 books since 2015, and I've worked on stuff that's never been published before. And one of the projects that I worked on was I wanted to write a book about victims of World War II. Now, this is where it gets interesting. If you go in town, there's plaques, there's memorials, and it talks about these 1,200 plus victims. We know about them. They've had books written about them. They've had articles written about them. But what we don't know about is that during World War II, there was another group of victims that died, never got the rights. They were never told. They're forgotten about. And those were the victims of the blackouts. During the blackouts, over hundreds of people died, by walking in front of cars, falling into the docks.
Wow.
And it's true, you don't think?
Yeah. No, so I wanted to write a book about them, so I spent months in the archives researching all these victims of the blackouts and wrote this book. And I remember when I finished it, it was just like this emotional, like, weight had been lifted because I'd told their stories. And I wrote a book about William Papa, a 14-year-old fisher lad that was murdered in 1882. And I remember when I was writing that, I've got kids, so writing that was really hard, especially when it got to the bit about what they did to him, the suffering that he went through. And I remember when I finished it, I just saved it, switched off my computer and said, I'm going for a walk.
Yeah.
And I went out and sat on Victoria Dock for an hour by myself just to because I'd finished it and I was quite happy with that. But the emotional strain that it put on me, that was pretty bad. and since then, I've written books about child murder and stuff, murder of ladies and stuff. And it doesn't seem to affect me as much now. But back then, it was like quite a big toll.
I think when you can sort of bring it to your personal situation, I remember somebody I worked with who we used to often recommend books to each other, and we're both interested in history. And I'd read a book about a Holocaust survivor, and I'd recommended it, and he said, actually, I can't read them anymore, because my kids are of an age where all I think about is these things happening to them, and he just couldn't do it. So I think he had quite a few years off reading about anything along those lines.
It's harder when you can connect to the subject. Yeah. 100%.
But then again, someone said to me, that's one of the reasons why you do it so well, is that you put your heart and soul into it in telling their stories, and that's why you work so well doing it, because you sort of connect with them on a level that's through time, I guess.
And that links back to Brett's question about is this an occupation, a profession? Which it is, but it's a passion as well.
It's a calling,
and that does shine through, certainly on the tours we've been on and from speaking to you.
100%.
So the glitzy question, which I must say was on my lips when I very first came to one of your tours, and you spoke about it at the beginning. So you've mentioned you've sold some rights to Hollywood. I know you just mentioned that one. So what topics were there that?
So one of them was the Marphilippe murder mystery. That was the big one that they wanted. I think it was there was another one of them was a Jack the Ripper book, which was Annie Chapman, which was about a victim. Another one was a Jack the Ripper book, which was about a lady called Martha Taberham, which I've never published. I've just given them the manuscript. They'd read it and said, "We want to buy this," and it's never been published. And then the other one I think was the Silver Hatchet Gang, the rise of the Silver Hatchet Gang, because they were like the Peaky Blinders.
Yeah, that stuff's quite popular.
They saw that and thought, hey, up there, we can. And they're all in development hell. So but this is the thing, legally, I don't know where I stand with all this, because it was 2015 when I sold the rights to all them. It was quite an exciting time, and nothing happened. They make all these big promises and stuff, and I remember having conference calls with people in Hollywood and LA and all of it, and everyone was like, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do the other.
It must have been really exciting.
I was getting really excited every day, but at the same time as well, I was like a stay-at-home dad, so I was like taking the kids to school, doing school meetings and going home and having conference calls with people in Hollywood and stuff. It was bizarre. But then nothing happened, and it was just kind of a bit disheartening, really.
I was going to say, I bet it was.
The contracts, if they ever get made and they ever make money, I'm laughing. I could retire. But it's the if it ever.
I'd love to see one of those.
All of them topics sound great.
Well, I think they have I think the idea is they have the rights for a set period, and if they don't do anything with that,
it reverts
back. And I've never really looked into it, to be honest. So.
I think it is something like 5 or 10 years. I think that's why Sony have constantly, a little bit off topic, but Sony have always made sure to have some kind of Spider-Man movie in the works before Marvel have sort of got the core rights now. But it's because if they didn't do something with it, Marvel would get it back. And it's just like, but quid's in for Sony to keep making Spider-Man movies because Spider-Man's so big. And I think that's why we've always had another version of it. And because I think it's not a very long period of time at all. I think it's something like 5 or 10 years. But it's a shame, especially with the sort of Peaky Blinders type. You kind of feel like they've missed the boat on that one. Really.
It's so popular, isn't it, that sort of stuff. And it'd be such a good setting
Yeah.
some
Oh yeah,
stories
I mean,
like
can you imagine that filmed in Hull, in Old Town?
Yeah,
it'd be amazing.
Yeah.
That's it. Not only is it set in Hull, but then it's filmed in Hull as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd just be amazing,
Well,
wouldn't
we've got in the next month we've got a Bollywood film being filmed in Old Town because I've had to arrange all my tours around their filming schedule so that I don't. Because I mean, can you imagine coming on a ghost walk, coming around the corner and they're all dancing along the high street?
it? It's so surreal.
Yeah.
I feel like I was on drugs.
Yeah, exactly. So I've had to arrange all my tours around their filming schedule.
My God. Okay. Well, we'll keep our eyes out for
Definitely.
those. I suppose
Definitely.
we'll have to
Keep
see.
open.
Yeah, that's it, definitely.
We did. You did mention it earlier. I don't know if you're allowed to say, Mike, but certainly after I'd first been on one of your tours along with Brett, I was really interested in your books, and I immediately tried to find them, and I couldn't get them.
Yeah.
Is there any news on that?
So during lockdown, my publisher had a disagreement with Amazon, which resulted in the entire label getting removed from Amazon. The idea was that we're going to get back on, we're going to start publishing, and then I just got an email saying we can't get back on, we can't republish. So as it stands, I signed a rights reversal order some years ago to get the rights back. I went to seek legal action and was told that you can, if you rewrite the book and edit it, you can republish it as new.
That's new.
And you've got the rights to that. But it takes time. So things like the Silver Hatchet Gang, I've rewritten that.
Yeah.
It's like almost double in length because of all the research and stuff. My Fleet Murder Mystery, I've rewritten that one. I've been going through a process of rewriting all the ghost books that I've published and stuff. So they will get republished.
Yeah.
I've had offers from publishers, but I've not had the right one.
Right.
I want to work with a publisher that respects the material. So I want to work with a publisher that's published stuff like that previously. I've had fictional publishers come to me.
Yeah.
The problem with that is if you publish through a fiction house, people will think you're ex-fiction.
Yeah.
So I've had some nice offers, but I'm just waiting for the right one.
Oh, good.
No, I respect that.
But in the meantime, I've got a USB stick at home with 150 books on, sat there. And I've said to the kids, if that happens to me, get them out there.
Yeah, brilliant. It's a shame we can't go around selling USB sticks.
Yeah.
Keep a place in the garden shed for the Mark Fleet.
Yeah. That's got to be on its own USB stick, that one.
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously, with so much history at your disposal, then, and all the history you've covered in your books, and obviously your personal love for the topic, you clearly have a great knowledge of the timeline of hauntings in Hull. What are some of the earliest reported hauntings in Hull, and do these still persist today?
So one of the earliest ones was in the 1850s. It was known as the Wellington Lane Ghost, and it took place on where modern day Linnea Street is in Hull, just opposite Hull Royal Infirmary.
Okay.
And there was a house, a family called Mr. B, and he had a wife and daughters, and they would hear rapping, like knocks and stuff, not like M&M rapping.
I'm glad you cleared that up.
So and then he'd asked
Victorian rap.
Yeah, he'd asked this policeman had come. The policeman had gone to the press. The press published the story. 1850s, Paragon Station had not been open that long, so thousands of people turned up to the house. It was chaos. And they eventually got the top minds of Hull together. They had this big meeting with people from the Hull Philosophical Society, the Literacy Society, the School of Anatomy, all these people. And the best idea that they could come up with was, let's take the walls off the house. And the papers were saying, well, if you do that, it's not a house. You might as well just knock it. You might as well knock it down. And of course, back then there was no running water, there was no gas, there was no electric, so we can get rid of all them ideas. They looked for things like squirrels and vermin, and there was none of that. It's unexplained. I mean, it's all gone now, so nothing's happened there since. So that's a really, really interesting one from that period. One of my favourite ones was from, I'd say it was about 1886, the Park Street Ghost. So there was a property on Park Street, and children reported seeing a ghost in the property. And according to them, it would like move the curtains around, like woo. And kids started playing truant and going to the property instead of going to school. And every time the curtains moved, the kids would pick up rocks and throw them at the house. It would smash the windows. The police got involved because it was first off, it was the truancy, but secondly, criminal damage, and thirdly, there was pulling up, the sets and cobbles off the roads to throw at this property. And eventually, the whole watch committee got involved. They were the people that were in charge of the whole police and said, "Can we investigate this?" They flooded the house with police officers and found the cause. All it was because of kids throwing rocks at this building, it had blown out a window, and every time a train went by next to Park Street, the wind blew through the house and made the curtains move. So the kids threw more rocks, which then created this wind tunnel effect, which made it... And it was just a vicious circle, and in the end, they just boarded it up and said, right, it's not haunted at all. Just you guys are just idiots, basically.
Wow.
So that was a really, really cool one, because it was... Again, they've got the police involved, so the authorities are involved in the investigation. So stories like that I love. They're like the really early Victorian stories. And that was from a period before there was radios and TV. With the first story, what they used to do with that is they used to reenact it at the start of theatre performances. So when you went to theatre, before the show came on, they would reenact the day's events from this house on Wellington Lane, where you'd have someone dressed in a sheet knocking on a wall, I'm assuming. And so really bizarre stories.
Like a live enactment of the news.
It would have been just like that. But of course, it was entertainment. Thousands of people turn up for this property. And then there was a really interesting one, which involved a guy called Constable Con O'Kelly. And he was a police officer, but he was from a family known as the Fighting O'Kellys. And Constable Con O'Kelly had previously been in the Olympics, and he'd won an Olympic gold medal for wrestling. And in 1908, they sent him to a haunted house. And of course, when you send a gold-winning wrestler to go and fight a poltergeist, it makes headline news. And it was reported all over the world. And he'd basically go in and get stuff thrown at him, and it was mad. It was a mad story, and it kind of just ended.
It's a great name as well. It sounds like a wrestler's name.
I thought he was going to say he was going to go in there and give someone a rock bottom or something like that.
He might have done. He might have attempted to. So that was interesting. There was one where on Kent Street where a girl was she'd undergone poltergeist activity for quite a while. They had exorcisms. I'm talking like 1912-ish period, and they kept taking her to the church, and she'd be scratched and the bed would move and all this kind of stuff. And I remember that story sort of died. There was nothing more in the archives about that. But I remember writing a story about her, and after it was published, a family got in touch and said, she was plagued by activity for years afterwards.
Really?
So that was pretty cool. And then on the flip side of that, Arundel Street, which is just off Oldham Road, there was a house there, and on a night the girls would go to bed, and downstairs they would hear cracking, they'd see flashes of light, and they'd smell sulphur. And they got the church involved. Reverend Gross, I think he was called, he was ordered to come in and investigate. He went to the property, and sure enough, there was flashes of light, there was the smell of sulphur. And one night he said to the girls, right, I'm going to tuck you into bed and I'm going to leave, see what happens. And he left, and sure enough, it happened. So the next night he said, I'm going to tuck you into bed and see if it happens again. I'm going to leave. And he did that thing, where the fake walk down the stairs and sat outside the door, heard the girls moving about in the room, barged in. They were lighting fireworks in the fireplace. And that's what the smell of sulphur was from the burnt fireworks. The flashes and bangs were from the fireworks. He caught them in the act. But his story basically opened up a floodgate, because it was reported in the press, and then people would write in with their spiritualism views, and it was the time when spiritualism was on the rise, and people would talk about things. And I think they called him at one point the Satanic Majesty. This house in East Hull is home to the Satanic Majesty. In actual fact, it was home to a couple of girls with fireworks, but it was a wonderful story. And he was a really interesting character, because he was a vicar, but he had one of them big wide brim hats on.
Proper classic exorcist style. Yeah, nice. Oh wow. Well, I think we would be remiss if, while discussing the hauntings of Hull, there's one which comes up time and time again in the UK paranormal circles, and I think you're going to know which one I'm talking about, and that is 39 De Grey Street. So this site has been host to numerous paranormal investigations from ghost hunters, tours from paranormal groups, etc. A large number of people who have attended the site have gone on to describe paranormal events at varying levels, some being minor, where others have described activity which is really quite terrifying. So, anybody who isn't aware, 39 Grey Street is a house in Hull, UK, that has earned the chilling epithet of Britain's most haunted, maybe. It is also known in ghost hunting circles as the Hostel. Over the year, it has drawn repeated reports of strange, terrifying occurrences, and let's just walk through some of those most frequently cited phenomena. So, first of all, poltergeist type activity. The owner, Andy Yates, has repeatedly reported poltergeist activity such as items moving on their own, for example, steak knives balanced across plates in the drying rack, without his intervention. Pictures on the wall would be straightened by Andy because he has OCD, although I don't know why you'd still leave a picture that was not straight even if you didn't have OCD. Well, that's just bizarre. But he would later find them skewed after straightening them, despite no one else being in the room or in the house. Apparitions and shadows. One particularly dramatic story shared by Andy was when he woke up one night to see the figure of a young girl at the foot of his bed. She hovered, she was crying, she was wringing her hands, until he waved a cricket bat at her and she vanished into the fireplace. Just a cricket bat to hand, you know. Other visitors have claimed to see the shadow of a child emerging from the fireplace and retreating. So there's also reports of a male presence that physically grabbed or throttled people, especially in the cupboard under the stairs, which is said to have been a place where children were locked in. According to the Haunted Happenings website, which is a UK-based ghost tour organisation, one woman who lived there in that property described the following, quote, "She called the police as she thought that menacing intruders were inside the property. She said that she'd been dragged out of bed and strangled in the middle of the night. However, when the police arrived, they told her that they felt her call was tantamount to time wasting. As they left, a bookcase fell towards them. Needless to say, they ran out of the house in fear." End quote. Yeah. Cheers, police. Cheers, Popo. So, other activity reported by visitors, this is the sound of children crying and seeing children's shapes and or shadows. Mediums have sensed a mass of child spirits held captive in this building by their guardians. One website claimed mediums detected, quote, 15 to 20 child spirits in the building, permanently in a state of fear, end quote. So perhaps one of the most telling indicators is that current owner Andy Yates has reported he tried to rent the property and found that no one stayed more than a few days, citing uncontrollable fear, furniture being thrown, and something evil lurking within. It has been said that even before Andy took ownership of the property, this was a similar case for those that had lived there previously over the years, with those who resided there leaving the property abruptly and swiftly, fleeing in terror. So, why might this house be haunted? Well, mediums have claimed the house was once a foster care home or some kind of childcare institution with abuse, giving an explanation to the 15 to 20 child spirits all in a state of fear residing within. And this has given 39 Grey Street the terrifying moniker, the Hostel. So, now, the story of 39 Grey Street is truly terrifying, a property with a terrifying history steeped in tragedy, which, as we know, are absolutely perfect conditions for a location to be a breeding ground for restless spirits and ghosts to wreak havoc. But is that all it is? Is it nothing but a story? Mike, can you perhaps shine some light on the somewhat dubious legend of 39 Grey Street, both from a historical perspective and even a personal one?
Can indeed. In 2015, I was asked to appear on Most Haunted Live, and it was for Halloween. And the following week, I was stopped on Holderness Road in Heastal by a gentleman who said to me, and these are exact words, "Can you imagine if you had a haunted house? You could make quite a lot of money." And I thought, it's a bit weird. A week later, he stopped me on Holderness Road again and said, "You'll never guess what? I've got access to a haunted house." And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, it was a morgue and it was a mortuary, which are technically the same thing. He said it was a funeral parlour and a coffin maker. He said it was a hostel and 20 children were murdered in there. He said it was a place where there'd been murders, deaths and suicides. He said the previous occupant had lived in there and been dragged from the bed by an unseen hand, called the police, and the police fled from the property. He said people have tried to live in there, but they can't. He also said, we've tried to research it and we're having trouble researching it. So I said, how did you research it? He said, we looked on Google. Which is, it's like, you don't do that. So I said, give me the address and I'll have a look for you. Oh, no, I can't do that. So I waited till it was in the whole Daily Mail. They advertised an event where it was £69 per person to spend the night. But by then, I've got the address. So I went to the History Centre. Anyone can go to the History Centre in Hull. It's absolutely free. The first thing I do is I look at the trade directories. So the trade directories are published every year. In Hull, we've got them from the late 1700s up to 1968. So that gives you pretty good coverage. And it lists the people that have lived in there and their occupations. Have you ever heard of Ardacre's removals?
Yeah.
That's pretty much it. That's as exciting as it gets. It was originally it was originally opened and owned by the Hardacre family. They had it as a big property with the room at the back and room at the side where they could store their equipment and stuff. It was later owned by a guy called Mr. Lee who made organs, and it was also owned by a guy who used to breed Shepeki puppies. No idea what they are. Not even tried to Google them, but I'm assuming they were dogs.
Sounds terrifying.
It was never a funeral parlour. It was never a coffin maker. It was never a morgue. It was never a mortuary. It was never a hostel. There was never 20 kids killed in there because something like that would leave a record. You would be able to look at that. I managed to track down all the people that had lived in there through things like the electoral roll, like I said, the trade directories. And I spoke to the last lady that lived in there and said to her, is it true what happened to you? And she sent a response back and said, it's all a load of rubbish. She said, when we lived in there, it was a beautiful family home. Since people have taken it over, I'm not going to mention names, but since people have taken over, it's gone to rack and ruin. And this is obviously a great financial revenue earner. So I thought, how can I confirm all that? I've already debunked all the history, but how can I confirm the stories? So I sent a Freedom of Information request to Humberside Police, which is a legally binding document. They have to respond to that. And I just asked, have you ever been called 39 de Grey Street? And they sent a reply back after 30 days. So every aspect of the story has been debunked. But then I thought, well, what about the neighbours? So I spoke to people that lived on the street and they said never heard about it being haunted. No, a lot of students lived in there over the years.
Yeah.
There's never been any reports. But then the story started evolving and they said, well, next door was a co-op. Maybe that was the funeral parlour. Now, co-op do run funeral homes, but that particular co-op was a shop. So you wouldn't go in for your eggs and your milk and your bread and there'd be a body in the freezer out back. That just wouldn't happen. And then they changed the story and said, it was at the other side. So I researched that property. Went and researched that property and nothing. And
Mr. Lee that made the organs, that's the instrument.
Yeah. So absolutely bonkers. And again, I published my results. I published them in Outer Limits magazine, Paranormal Hauntings magazine, the Hull Daily Mail, and Haunted magazine. And that's when all the death threats started coming and people was like emailing me and things like that. And there was at one point I was asked to film a TV show called Ouija Dicing with Death at 39 de Grey Street. So we spent the night in there and the owner did come back and see me in there and kicked me out the property.
Hey!
So I had to film my scenes outside of the property. But in the last couple of years, we've sort of buried the hatchet. He's come over. And we was at the Horror Fest together, and he came over at the Horror Fest and said, I just want to let bygones be bygones. And we shook hands and stuff like that.
Okay, respect him.
But yeah, absolute nonsense.
I guess that just leads me into my next question there is, I think I can tell what the answer's going to be though. So, what do you think to the hauntings then? I mean, do you think it's haunted or...
Not in the slightest. I've spoke to paranormal groups, I've spoke to representatives from the press, When the original story first came out that first week, I tracked down every single reporter that covered that story, that visited that property and interviewed them, and none of them had experienced anything themselves. They went in listening to people that had, told stuff. At one point, there was an interview of this lady who had lived there, and she was telling all these stories. Her name didn't appear on the electoral roll. So it's all about the Benjamins.
Yeah.
And it was just every aspect. Every time they were coming out with new stuff, I was able to go to the archives and debunk it. And it's people still tag me in it to this day. This was 2015. This story came out, a decade, and people are still tagging me in it. And I've not been on social media. I've not been on Facebook for like nearly a year.
Yeah, you told me about
one of the benefits of that is these constant taggings in Dirty Handy Grey Street stories. It's a blessing.
But
it's a funny one with the Grey Street, because we heard the stories at that time.
Yes.
And we were fascinated. We went and looked outside the building, didn't we?
Yeah.
It's a creepy looking
really
yes, exactly.
Yeah. And inside as well, I don't know if you've seen the pictures, but every room is filled with tat.
Yeah.
So like these dolls, these clowns, these coffins, but one room is just full of mirrors.
It's just so stereotype though, isn't it, as well? Yeah. It's so cliched. I mean, every room is a room from a horror movie. It's so cliched. But yeah, from the outset, we went, didn't we? Because we heard about it and it was like, well, I've always generally lived in this area. And so one night we were just like, oh, we'll take a drive and we'll just go and have a look. And we just pulled up and we got out and we were like, it is a creepy looking place.
Yeah.
And
when I sort of got wind that it probably wasn't true, I was disappointed, but certainly didn't threaten anyone with death.
Yeah. Well, in fact, I think we learned about the fact that it wasn't haunted from you.
Yeah, I think we'd spoke about it.
Yeah. I'm sure we would, because but never at any point when you told me that I was like, I'm gonna fucking kill him. He's fucking dead to me. It's just nonsense. It's just like, okay, well, it's not haunted.
Yeah, what a shame. That bit of a obscure way maybe of looking at it, but whether it's through hysteria or whatever, people do seem, when they go on the paranormal evenings, ghost hunts at the Grey Street, they do report some pretty scary experiences. I'm sure the people themselves probably believe it because they're not making any money out of it. So even though we've debunked the past and the history, and it certainly looks as though it was done for money making, do you think it is still possible that somehow the place is haunted? And we've spoken before about tulpas, which is a really fascinating idea where you can almost manifest, especially in a collective group. You can manifest something. So I wonder if those energies either attract something or form some sort of
there was
tulpa.
In Canada many years ago, there was an experiment where they created a ghost called Philip.
Yes.
Yeah, so it could be possible. It's something like that. Or, the collective energy of everyone inside conjures up something.
Yeah.
I remember when we went, nothing happened. Nothing whatsoever. And we spent time in each room with all the lights out, and chanting and asking and screaming, and nothing happened. But I guess it's that if you're in there and something does happen, it's like that thing where we was talking about earlier of normal before paranormal. Is it paranormal, or is it just something that's happening that they're perceiving to be paranormal? And especially if you've got 30 people in there and something happens, you've got to rule out 29 other people before you can say. And I spoke to one lady and she said there was someone in the group threw a ball and it caused hysteria. People were screaming. She said, but I saw her throw the ball. So there was stuff like that where for them 29 other people, that's paranormal.
Yeah.
But for the people that have witnessed it, and I remember years ago we was at a venue and this guy turned up and he sort of stood there and he said, do you mind if I ask out for activity? I went, no, of course not. And I had my night vision camera and I was filming him and he said, if there's anyone here, give us a sign. And it was quiet and he knocked.
Oh,
and I caught him and I didn't say anything. And
Yeah.
he went, that was a bit weird, wasn't it? I went, ask out again. So I got in a better position and he went, if anyone's here, give us a sign. And he kicked the wall behind him. And I'm thinking,
I don't get it.
I don't. You're not only hoodwinking yourself, but you're ripping off all these other people.
Yeah.
And I remember going to the people that were running the event and showing them the footage and saying, I've just caught this guy. like, what do you want to do? And they was like, we'll have a word with him. And they had a word, but then at the next event, he was at the next event. And then at the next event, he was at the next event.
Yeah.
So it made me kind of wonder, is he a plant?
Yeah.
Is he someone that they've got in? But we used to have people coming in and if you've got loads of candles about and it makes wax, they'd throw wax beads.
Yeah, 'cause it's quite undetectable, really.
Yeah.
Like,
so, but if you're stood there and something hits you,
yeah.
and there was a lot of work going on, so there was a lot of nuts and bolts and spanners and stuff flying about. But you'd get people pick up little pins and they'd flick them, stuff, and you'd see it on camera, and you'd take them aside and say, "I've just caught you."
You see, this is the bit I don't get, because if you're going, unless you are a plant, when you go on these things, you want to experience it because you're trying to prove to yourself as well that it could very well be real. This could be true. The paranormal activity could be real. But why would you want to go on there and then fake it? Because surely if you've got an interest in the paranormal and you're going on these kinds of things, it's because you want that evidence too.
You want to see it.
If you're causing it, you know damn well it's not real.
Exactly.
Like,
so what's the point? I think
for a lot of the fellas, they were throwing stuff. Everyone was reacting, but they were all the big bravado. So but then there was incidents where stuff happened and we just couldn't explain it. I remember one night we had a coffin with a Ouija board, and on top was a red glass, and inside was on top was a glass, and inside was a red LED, and it was pitch black apart from that little red LED, and we were asking out for activity, and everyone was stood around, and I never join in because I don't want people to say I'm swaying the results. And we was asking out for activity, and the glass wasn't moving, and people was getting quite angry, and all of a sudden in the corner of the room was a male voice, and it just went, "No." And so we closed the session down. We got up. We started to leave. As you can imagine, we were moving quite quickly. And we heard the glass moving, and we all turned, and you could see the glass moving across the top. And it flew off into the corner of the room. Now, it's my job to go and get that. So I had to run in and grab it. And the glass was in one piece.
Whoa.
wow.
And I'm thinking that should have smashed. And even now, it's just
I've
a
just
really
got
weird
that, man,
experience.
Yeah.
And I remember there was like 30 of us in that room at that time. We all witnessed it and we all saw it. And to this day, I still stay in touch with quite a few of them. And every time I see them, they bring it up that night when. And we did one at, the ferry inn at Brough.
Yeah.
So we was doing an investigation at the ferry, and I was working with my team. We'd gone in, we'd been in a circle, and we had the spirit box on. And there was a voice. And it was a female voice, and I said, "Who is it?" And plain as day, a name came out, and it said Marjorie. Now, if you know anything about the ferry inn, there was a really horrific case in the Second World War where a young man called Stanley Hoff was driving around Brantingham Dale. He was picking up girls, trying to do things with them, and they were fighting back. And one girl fought back, and he executed her. He ended her life, basically. But he was an idiot because he parked up near Wardby Dam. I don't know if you know the area, but Wardby Dam is not far from Railwell.
We've always found it quite
an eerie place.
It's eerie.
It's near the old mausoleum as well. So it's an eerie place. He left the van there overnight and went home. And dog walkers the next morning saw it, looked through the window because they thought it was abandoned, saw the body, called the police turned up, traced it back to him, they arrested him. They took him to the police station in Brough, which is next door to the ferry. And he escaped, he jumped over the wall and got hid in the ferry. And then he escaped in the ferry and ran. And they sent, from Brough, they sent the aeroplanes up looking for him. And they found him and caught him and arrested him, and he was sent to trial. And in the court, it transpired that it was the day after his wedding that he'd done this, and his wife was heavily pregnant. So this guy was the worst of the worst. So this voice came through, and it was Marjorie, and I was like, "Marjorie, was you murdered?" And yeah. "Did Stanley kill you?" And she went, "Yeah." And she went, "Stanley's here." And then she went quiet. And I hate people that hurt animals, that hurt children, that hurt women. So I got my back up, and I was like, "Right, bro, like, Stanley, if you're here, come and face me right now." And the spirit box was quiet. And in the corner of the room near the toilets at the ferry inn, we had a man go, "No!"
Whoa.
And I was like, "Right, let's go find this guy." Not quite the words I used. There was a few swear words in there, as you can imagine. And we heard footsteps going upstairs, so we followed upstairs, and there's a big function room that's empty. So we set the spirit box up, and I said, "Right, if you're here, Stanley, come and face me like a man. Like, I'm ready. Let's, I don't, really, let's take this man to man, come and face me. And it said, F off, Mike.
Oh.
And I was like, whoa. But I got angry. And I was like, no, mate, I'm not. And my mate Matt's like, Mike, calm down, Mike.
Yeah.
It's not worth it, mate. And I was like, no, mate,
it's not worth getting possessed.
I'm not, like, come and face me like a man. And all the guests are sat there like, what? And he went, Mike, go F yourself.
Jeez.
And I'm like, what? And so I'm getting angrier all the time. And I'm like, and it's my energy making him, And I'm like,
well, they say it feeds.
Yeah, come on, come right now. I'm right here, right now. And then he started laughing. And he went, "Will you be my friend, Mike?" And I went, "Oh mate, you can go and F yourself." So and then it all went quiet. So we're getting ready to pack up and we're leaving and stuff like that. And I'm with Matt. All the guests have gone downstairs. Me and Matt are just alone in this room. And he's like, "It's weird, man. He mentioned your name. Like that
is weird.
Pretty weird."
Yeah.
And I was like, but he didn't do anything, did he? So, he's a big wimp. Like, he can only do it to little girls. And I'm walking out the room, and with that, I felt something pull my leg. And you could see, like, my trousers, like, getting pulled. And Matt was like, what the hell? And I could feel my knee going, because it was, like, pulling my leg. And I started laughing. And I Matt grabbed my hand, and we're holding on to each other, because if I'm going to go off, I'm going to drag Matt with me. And I'm laughing. And Matt went, bro, why are you laughing? And I'm like, because if that's the worst they can do, he's pulling my pants. Man. That's what you do at primary school. And I wrote about it for, I think it was an Haunted magazine. I wrote about it because I just said, like, that getting called out like that and having someone say things like that to you, just surreal.
Yeah.
But the fact that we was in a room full of people and they all heard it, we recorded it as well, so it was documented. But man, that was... Yeah,
I mean, for it to not only give responses like that, but after each response, it's specifically naming you and saying your name. That is, that's really quite remarkable.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I was thinking about people faking stuff on these sort of evenings and why you might do that. But it reminded me of when we were at Rip and Workhouse, and we had one minute we had spirit box quite strongly, didn't it? You remember it said leave now.
Yeah.
And then I think it said leave again after that.
It said leave to start with, then it said leave now. I didn't like it because the voice sounded awful. It sounded really demonic, and I didn't like it. And I was just like, if it's asking, I'm going. So see you later.
And we're at the foot of a really old stairwell, weren't we? That you can't go up it. It's cordoned off. And you can see it's through glass.
Yeah.
We were right near that when that happened.
Yeah.
But then on the same evening, somebody reported that they'd been chased by the wheelchair-bound mannequin that's part of the museum.
Absolutely ridiculous.
It ruined any feeling of creepiness because it was hilarious.
That's it, because they were basically next to each other. So there was this set of stairs where apparently some ladies had hung themselves. Not apparently, it's reported history that they all killed themselves on this set of stairs. And then next to it, there was sort of like, it was meant to be like a medical room, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Like a doctor's office.
Yes.
And there was this old wheelchair with this mannequin sat in it. And we found it just generally quite funny anyway, because the mannequin was of poor quality. And it did just sort of look funny.
Yeah, it wasn't a creepy mannequin, it was a funny one.
It was just kind of funny. And there's where, like, walking away or whatever, there's the girls screaming and running. They went, it started rolling after me. You were just like, what? And did it roll back, did it? Because it's not moved, back. You absolute
It reminds me of Fort Paul. Back in the day, not so much now because they've got rid of them all, but Fort Paul used to have a lot of mannequins in there. One of the setups looked like the cast of Dad's Army. You couldn't take it serious. Yeah. One of them was a man who was hanged, and he looked like Pike. And then one of them was like a display of witches getting burnt at the stake, but the witch was like a 1970s. She had like real big like hair. She had like this big silk dress on, and it looked like she'd just come out of Saturday Night Fever, and there was just burning it. So you can't take it serious. So it totally distracts you from it.
It does.
Yeah. Don't hang there, Pike. Yeah. So one of the things I just mentioned there when we was talking about De Grey Street was that like they've had mediums in there with all these stories and all this past, which is obviously fictitious, but. Do you have any sort of mediums who come to you personally who, you actually do respect and revere as being genuine and actually do come to work with you properly side by side?
So when I first started doing this, way back, I got the. Do you remember the yellow pages?
Of course.
And I got the landline. Just went for the A to Z of pubs. Just, are you haunted? And, you can imagine some of the responses I got. Right at the end, there was Yorkshireman pub, and I rang it up and said, "Is it true that I'd heard reports that they were having ghost stories and stuff like that." And she said, "Come and meet our landlord tomorrow." So I went the next day and didn't know this guy, and he came downstairs and he said, "Come with me," and he took me upstairs to the first floor. So already I'm like, okay, we go into this room and it's pitch black, and he sits me down and it's a circle. And there's a table in the middle, and he sits opposite me, and he went, "Don't tell me anything, don't say a word." He went, "There's a man with me, and he's telling me that you're going to go shooting rabbits, but not just yet." And I was like, what the hell? When I was a little boy, my granddad used to sit me on his knee, and opposite his house was a field. And he used to say to me as a little boy, "I'm going to take you shooting rabbits one day, but not just yet."
Wow.
Jesus.
So this guy, it's called John Green. He's worked on a show called The Best of British Mediumship. He's worked with a lot of the old names from all the old days of psychics and mediums and stuff like that. We used to run a psychic circle in Yorkshire, and me and him just became best mates. And I would ring him up and say, "I've got a postcode for you, meet you there in half an hour." And he'd go to that postcode, and I'd take him to a property, and I'd have the history on my tablet, and he'd come out with names and dates. Wow. And it was just amazing. And we still work together now. I've not seen him for a while, but we do a lot of house blessings together. So some of the most amazing ones, he took me to a house on Pransholme, and this family had got in touch and said, we're seeing stuff in the living room. And I said to John, "Can you come and help me?" He came and picked me up, give him the postcode, went to the house. He walked in and he went, "There's a man and he's covered in leather, and he's sat here like that." And I'm like, "Oh man, like, I hope he's not picking up on the husband," or And she was like, "Oh my God, like we've seen this man in leather, like in this bit." And I had the history on my tablet, and it was a dairy farm. And I had a photo of just off Leeds Road of this dairy farm, and there was these big long sheds where they would have milked the cows. And that's what he was seeing. My mind went somewhere completely.
I thought you was back at Yorkshireman.
Yeah, so my mind went completely, but the amount of times he's picked up on stuff, and I've been like, that is spot on.
Wow.
Like the history of that. And other times as well, we'd gone to Lonsdale Centre, and I remember we walked in and he went, "Oh, there's like barrels and ropes and bits of wood, and there's people climbing and swinging." And I'm like, okay. It took me something like 6 years to track down a photograph of Lonsdale Centre back in the 50s when the Boy Scouts used to use it. They used to make obstacle courses, and there was all these pictures of all these barrels and ropes and stuff. And I remember showing them to him, and he was like, "That's exactly what I saw." And then another time, we was at Royal Station Hotel, and he walked into this room and he went, "Something's missing." He went, "Something should be in here." And the guy was like, "I think I know what it is." And he took us down into the cellar. There was these beautiful portraits that was about 5 foot by about 8 foot. And it was of Charles I at Beverley Gate. And they were beautiful, hand-painted out, gorgeous. And he said, "We believe these were upstairs, but we can't find any evidence of whereabouts they were." About 6 months later, I was in the History Centre, and I was going through the card index, and they had a thing about the architecture of the Royal Station Hotel in this old book. And I requested the book. They brought the book out. It was all dusty and smelly. Opened it up, and there was pictures of the hotel. And then I opened it up. There was a picture of the room with the fireplace with these 2 portraits above the fireplace. And I remember taking a picture and sending it to John. And I was like, wow. And I got a photocopy of it and ran over to Yorkshire and banged it down on the top and went, "Look at that." And he was like, "That's what I saw." And it was just, and I've worked with him for so long, and he's one of the most people that I really, really respect.
Brilliant. That must be good though, because
he's such a nice guy, and he picks up on the history.
Yeah.
And he's told me stuff over the years about things, and I've just been like, "How can you know that?" We had an investigation at Royal Station, Hull New Theatre, and at that time I was doing some private genealogy research for a client, and this client had got in touch with me and asked me to do the family tree. And we'd met online. It was a really nice family, really nice guy. And I'd gone away and started researching it. Now, when I do people's private research, that's private. Nobody knows my clients except for me. And I'm researching this guy, and that night we had a paranormal night at O'Neill Theatre, and John was on stage, and it was pitch black, and me and my team are sat there, and he's up there, and he said, "Oh, there's a man, and he's got a walking stick, real nice suit, and a top hat, and he's telling me that someone in this room is researching him." And I'm like looking around at my mates and that, like, who else is doing research? And he went, "Mike, it's you." And I was like, "Yeah," because I research a lot of people, that, and I'm like,
Yeah.
"Can you prove it?" He went, "Yeah." He said, "There's a photograph upstairs in the manager's office, and if you take it off the wall and open the back, it's got his name on it." So I looked across at the guy who was the key holder, and he went, "We can do that." So went upstairs, went into the manager's office, got this picture off the wall, took the frame off the back. There was the name of the man that I was researching. But not only that, he was a photographer who used to take pictures of the theatre back in the day. And I'd not told anyone. And he'd come out with all this stuff about this guy. And I was like, how is that possible?
Wow.
How is that?
That
It's
is
just mental.
That
It's absolutely
is
bonkers.
crazy.
But yeah, so many places we've been to, we've picked up on.
I mean, it's like I said, it's great that you've at least got someone who you can go to for that kind of thing, because your paranormal work is, I would say, quite closely knit into that medium's.
I mean, on the flip side of that, I've worked with some shocking ones.
Well, yeah, that's literally what I was about to come to. To be fair,
I've been at events where they've come up with all sorts of nonsense,
as just proven in the whole.
and I've researched their claims and gone away and spent hours in the archives trying to debunk or prove, and more often than not, they're just coming out with rubbish.
What a shame, though.
Yeah,
And I think that's the reason. It's probably the area of the paranormal that I'm least convinced by. And I think it is because you come across so much rubbish. Well, that being said, I've attended various psychic evenings with my auntie who was into that stuff, and very occasionally I've spoken to a medium who have got quite a lot of things right that are quite obscure and not something you just guess.
See, I often find the ones that are really talented are the ones that don't broadcast it. The ones that keep it quiet.
Yeah.
And you'll find these ones that do. My sister's terrible for it. She'll add them on Facebook and then go for a reading. And I'm like, scroll through your timeline and see all your drama. They know everything.
Yeah. That's it. I mean, and that's the other thing now, though. You make a really good point. I mean, everyone's life now is, most people have a very accessible life due to social media and everything.
All you need to do, you need to put on an event. People pay by credit card. You've got the name. You've got their address. You can search for that. You can find them on social media. Make up a fake profile. Add them. You've got access to everything. So when it comes to the night of your event, you can pull them up and say, "Oh, you've just bought a cat," and stuff like that. It's all out there, and I've found that time and time again. I've found people coming out with stuff, and I'm thinking it's quite common knowledge that what you're coming out with. It's not, or they've come out with stuff and you go and research it. It's not true.
What a shame. Yeah, because it's a shame that is the case, because you've got people like your friend who seem to be more like the genuine article, and it kind of discredits their genuity, if you will.
Yes.
But again, great that you've got a contact like that you can work closely with.
He's a good guy.
So now we know that this question might seem like it won't mean a lot to our listeners who aren't from Hull, but this question isn't so much about the where, but it's more the why. So you obviously do a lot of, the tours in Hull, and during which you discuss these locations which are reportedly haunted or have dark histories attached to them, which means you'd expect the place to be bursting with paranormal activity. But this regarding 39 De Grey Street, which we obviously know to be very open to interpretation, which building or place would you say is the most haunted in Hull, simply based on the amount of reported cases? So this is just reports that have come in, just based on the numbers, which is the most haunted place in Hull?
You joke, I just...
I saw that in the corner of my eye. I was like, why do that now? Stay there.
The answer, Brett, is your house.
Yeah. Stay there. Stop trying to make this place haunted.
Royal Station Hotel.
Really?
I just love it. I mean, it's such a shame that it's closed to the public at the minute. One of the first nights I ever went in there, I experienced in the basement, in the cellar area. I was with a guy called Ray. This big ball of light, moved across the room. I didn't see it. He saw it, and we caught it on camera. And when we reviewed the footage, we was like, "Oh my god, that is amazing!"
Wow.
Later in the evening, we were sat upstairs in the. I don't know if you've ever been in the hotel, but when you go up through the stairs into the main entrance, there's the bar, the reception, little seating area, and then a cafe or restaurant. And we were sat in this seating area having a cup of tea, and we saw this big puff of smoke just move between these two columns and disappear. And we were all sat there looking at it, and I was like, what the hell? And then later on in the corner where the restaurant is, there was a boy, and he was sort of stood with his arm in his shirt like this. And I looked over and said to Riz, like one of the members of staff, and at the time there was like myself, there was Ray, like a night watchman, the guy who does the doors, receptionist. There was about 6 or 7 of us big strapping fellas. We was all just sat around having hot chocolates and stuff. We all looked over at him and was like, "You don't work here." It's something a bit suspicious. So, as I said earlier about thinking normal before paranormal, we thought he broke in. So we ran after the little tow rag, and he ran down the corridor that's next to the restaurant, and we all ran after him, and he was about 6 foot in front of us, and he ran straight through a brick wall.
Wow.
And all of us together were like, whoa, like
Jesus.
what the hell? And I remember that we would, the rest of the night, no one would leave each other's side.
Yeah.
Everywhere. At one point, I went to toilet. I had footsteps behind me. I don't know if you remember the toilets in Royal Station Hotel. The corridor was quite long. And I looked round, and all the lads was following me. And I said, "What are you doing?" They said, "We don't want to go." And I remember we was all stood in the urinals next to each other because no one would go in the cubicles either. It was so surreal. But yeah, every night we went in there, we experienced stuff. On another occasion, we were in the tunnels underneath, and there was an old barber shop, an old Victorian barber shop. And you sort of walk in, it's a single door. You walk in, there's a big table. And then at this side, there's like a room with windows so you can see in. There's 3 mirrors. There's 3, what would have been sinks, but they've been smashed in, and 3 chairs. Then at that side, there's another single door that leads to some showers and baths. And this dates from a period where people wouldn't have had their own showers and baths and stuff. So they'd go to these Victorian bathhouses. And we were down there in this room, and we'd put a candle in the middle, and I'd be down there with 15 guests. And we'd put our hands on the table, and we'd ask out for activity, get them to knock and tap. And I remember looking around the room and thinking, there's 16 people here. And there was a guy in the doorway where the baths are, and he was really tall. And I said, "Excuse me, who are you?" And he walked backwards just into the darkness and just disappeared. And everybody saw it, and everybody freaked out. And we all tried to get out the room at the same time. But of course, you get wedged. Everyone's trapped.
Yeah.
No one can get out. And when you're on these things, when people get nervous, they either laugh.
Yeah, we've said that, haven't we?
They either scream or they break wind. So statistically speaking, in that room, there's weird noises and strange smells. But then I sort of said to some guys, calm down, because if we all die in here, like the next day, can you imagine Old Daily Mail? Next day, we've found this paranormal investigator with 15 guests and a weird smell of method. And I said, "We've got to go and look for this guy. We need to know who this guy is."
Yeah.
And I remember we went through with our torches, empty. Don't know who he was.
Did he appear as
It was
as
just
a normal
yeah, just
person?
normal.
Yeah.
It wasn't see-through, or he didn't
Yeah.
look like Casper. He was just like a normal guy. Because we thought, again, it got down into the tunnels and was just living down there or sleeping down there, something like that. But there was no sign of him whatsoever.
Walking backwards is quite eerie. Isn't
It was because it was so... If you can imagine, there's just one single candle. And that's the only thing illuminating the room. So you've got this kind of glow on his... And it was freaky. But it was really tall.
God.
And I remember at the time thinking, what the f*** is this guy?
Oh, that's I've
yeah.
just got gooses everywhere. Yeah, man. So that's so you would say that that's reportedly the most haunted place in Hull.
That's a place that I've experienced so much. Every time I've gone in there, I've experienced something new.
Okay.
And I must have done in the region of about 60 or 70 investigations in there. This, like when there was building St. Stephen's, there was pile driving a lot, so occupancy level dropped. So I would just ring them up and say, "Can I come and have a look tonight?" Well, there's no one in. They'd be like, "Yeah, of course." And the staff would still be there.
Yeah.
So I'd meet the duty manager, and we'd just go and do an investigation.
Yeah.
And I'd say to him, "What rooms are the most active?" We'd just get the keys, go and sit in that room for a couple of hours.
Wow.
Just asking out, set up some equipment, see what we get. Sometimes nothing. But sometimes there'd be knocks and taps. And I remember one night we got a phone call, and he came to see me real quick, and he was like, "We've got some guests coming. We thought it'd be really cool if they could join you and do like a little mini investigation." And I was like, "Yeah, sure." I said, who's coming along? And he said, "It's the Moscow State Ballerinas.
Oh wow!
They're doing like a thing at, I think it's Swan Lake at the theatre.
Yeah.
They're staying in a hotel." But he said, "Would you mind spending the night with 30 ballerinas?"
I don't
Bring 'em on.
Tough job.
Someone's got to do this.
Well, they were like 3 foot high. It was really weird. But it was great, and they were lovely. We had such a good night, and it was so fun and
Amazing.
really, really nice. But yeah, such an amazing building, that one. But like, it's not broadcast as being haunted.
Yeah.
I remember just before lockdown, the manager asked me to go in and give like a presentation to investors about the history of the building. And I was talking about its connections to the Yorkshire Ripper, its connections to Jack the Ripper. 10 suspects have stayed in there. In the early 1900s, 3 men were found with their throats cut in the hotel. So it's got quite a dark history. And I was talking about the ghosts, and at the end he was like, trying to get him to invest. so
They've left.
yeah, so they don't really promote it. But I was like, you should do, because dark tourism is huge.
Exactly.
So, but of course, it's been taken over now for other purposes. So.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So, okay, so what place, dare I say it, scares you the most? What place do you not like going to in Hull? So is there a place where you're like, okay, I've got to go there because of X, Y, and Z, but
Does it have to be Hull? That's a good question.
Okay, we'll go a bit further.
Well, in Hull, a couple really. I mean, Hull New Theatre, when I first did Hull New Theatre, freaked me out. I was doing an investigation in there where I got scratched on my neck.
Wow.
And I remember going to the bathroom afterwards and looking at my neck. I had these 3 big scratches on my neck. It freaked me out. I didn't go back for a year.
Wow.
And when I went back, I remember dropping all my gear and going straight into the darkness and saying, right, I'm back. Because I thought if I don't face up to it, I'll never overcome that. So that was a really interesting one. That freaked me out for so long, but now I'm over that. I'm quite happy to get locked in there on my own and leave me to it. In terms of across the region, I don't think there is anywhere really. I think most places where I've gone and just opened up and just gone and investigated, and I think a lot of places have like this kind of mystique. I remember the Feathers in Pocklington, supposed to be the haunted pub in East Yorkshire. Loads of stories connected to it, and I got in touch with them and just said, "Can I come and spend some time in the room?" And I remember going, and it was like a broom cupboard. And I remember being real disappointed. And my mate Terry, we'd gone there together in the car. He was walking around going, could do with a good clean, it could do with hoovering, it could, there's crap all over it. Yeah, he was just moaning about the state of it. And I'm like, this is really, the mystique of it is just totally gone. And it's such a beautiful building.
Yeah.
But the most haunted room, they've just locked it off for so many years, nobody uses it. It's just all, it's just bare and full of crap.
That's a bit anticlimactic.
Yeah, so that one was quite interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've spent many nights in places like the Golden Fleece, and I remember one night one of the rooms was really active. We'd set up REM pods, EMF detectors, cat balls, laser grids, you name it. We had about 40 different devices in that room.
Looks like something out of Tron.
Yeah, all of them was flashing. It was like a disco. And I remember my mate turning around to me and saying, you do realise you're spending the night in this room. This is the room that you've booked to sleep in. And I was like, oh, crap. And I remember I slept on top of the covers. I pulled a woolly hat down. I just had it sort of here. And I remember just looking out at my feet, because all the activity was centred around the bottom part of the bed. And I don't think I slept. But that was really interesting because nothing happened, thankfully. But I remember thinking, oh crap, at the end of the night when we'd finished the investigation, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, I remember thinking, I need to go get a couple of hours of shut eye before we leave. And I remember just laying there and just thinking, I can't sleep. I was up all night, I think, on Twitter, just scrolling through stuff. And but yeah, that was a weird one. Spent the night in a castle in Scotland called Yester Castle. And there were stories that it was the most haunted castle in Scotland. It was linked to black magic. One of the stories is that it was built by demons. There's a massive undercroft, which is supposed to be the first example of Gothic architecture in Great Britain. And then one of the stories was a man went to see the castle. The ghost of a black magician came out with a sword and cut him open and killed him. And I remember, and it's in the surrounding woodland's supposed to be cursed. And I remember like the trip there, it was like excitement, but at the same time you're thinking this is pretty serious stuff. And I remember we walked into the pub in Gifford, and it was like the slaughtered lamb, in there. We walked in and everyone was, the guy was like, "What are you here for?" I was like, "We're going to spend the night in the castle." And everyone just went quiet. And I was like, it was really weird. And I was like, we know the guy who's going to take you, he's on his way. And this guy called Frankie came and took us up to the castle. And the trek in was awful because it was like caked in mud. You're like walking down these old dirt trails through this forest. And we spent the night there, and it was actually really peaceful. Not a lot happened. But I remember the lead up to it, I was proper bricking it, and I remember that night we moved as a team because no one wanted to be a part. There was only 4 of us. Yeah. And then the next morning when Frankie came, I was like, "Do you know what, mate? It was a really good night. I slept really well. Not a lot happened. We had horses, which was weird because there's no horses. But other than that, it was quiet. And I remember we got back into Gifford, and I'd not eaten all night because I was nervous. Yeah. I didn't want to have to go off and have a crap in by myself. So I'd not eaten. And I remember the first thing he said to me was, "What can I do for you?" And I was like, "I need a sausage sandwich or something, man, because I'm starving." And he took us back into town and was like, "These are the guys that have spent the night." It was like a hero's welcome. Everyone was chatting to us. They took us to a cafe. He got me a sausage sandwich. It was a square sausage. Oh, yeah. It was the first ever square sausage that I'd ever had. And it was beautiful. And it was really, really nice. I remember getting home and thinking, I need to research this a bit more. Obviously, the story about the black magic is crap. Like, if you get killed by a black magician, how are you going to tell anyone that story? Already that's dodgy. It wasn't built by demons, it was built by slaves, but because no one had ever seen black slaves before, they didn't know what they were, so they just called them demons. And the thing that really, really pissed me off, it was built on a golf course with real nice paths. So we could have just walked around the golf course and got in that way, but we'd gone through this allegedly cursed forest, which is, I remember there was leaves like this big on some of the plants, and some of the tree trunks were like 50 foot wide. It was huge. Wow. It was just untouched by man. And I remember thinking, we walked through there, like dripping with sweat, carrying all our gear. So you've got all your camping gear, but all your paranormal gear. We could have just driven across that golf course.
Just got on a golf cart.
Yeah. So, wow. But that was an experience.
What an experience, yeah. I was just about to say that, yeah, what an experience. So, okay, then, so, like, how often would you say you get requests to investigate a place?
Oh, weekly, easily.
Really?
Yeah.
As often as that?
They come from all over the place. A lot of the time they'll come from private houses.
Yeah.
I get calls from businesses. Sometimes I'll get calls from schools, especially when kids are on holidays. The teachers will say, "Can you come in?" Because we've had stuff happening and we're a bit concerned. So that's quite regular. And then big venues and stuff like that, I'll just say, "Do you want to come and have a look?" And I've found as well, like, because of how far I am in my career, I'll just walk into a place. Or I'll flash Fred.
Yeah, the ghost on your hand,
yeah. People will see the tattoo and just go, "You're a ghost guy. Do you want to spend the night?" Yeah, right. Or they'll say, "We've got some really cool cellars that are supposed to be haunted. Do you want to go and have a look?" Let's do it. So I'll often carry my EMF detector with me and stuff like that. I'll often have equipment in my bag just in case. Yeah. Because people will. So, and it's the amount of impromptu investigations that I've carried out just because I've been in the right place at the right time. And a member of staff has come over and gone, "Do you want to come and have a look?" All right, yeah. Nice. I've been underground in so many places, unbelievable.
That sounds awesome. We always said that we've got like a fascination with like cellars, basements, tunnels, things like that. Man,
so many. I remember one. It was I think I've still got pictures on my phone. Actually, I have to show you before I finish. There was a lady had bought an old warehouse. They were putting new carpet down, and they took the old carpet up and found a hatch but no one would open it. So she got in touch with me and said, "Can you come and have a look?" Of course I can. So I remember we went round and it was a beautiful big warehouse. We lifted the hatch up and there were steps going down. Got my torch, went down. One of the most beautiful buildings I've ever seen. It was like a really long tunnel, but with beautiful vaulted ceilings, beautiful brick, bare brick. And I remember going down and filming down there, taking photos, taking it back to her and showing her that it was nothing suspicious. She came down to have a look, and I remember it was like money filled her eyes. She was like, oh, we could do stuff down here. The problem is, whenever the tide came in the River Hull, the water in the basement would rise.
Oh, right. Okay.
So there was nothing they could do down there. And I was like, you can't film. You can't, they wanted to do performances and plays and stuff like that. I said to him, you can't do that down there because people will get wet. The health and safety wise, it was a nightmare, but it was magnificent. It was such an amazing space. So yeah, I'll get invited down to places like that, and more often than not, they'll then say, "Oh, we've had ghostly experiences or stuff like that." It all seems to go hand in hand.
Yeah. I mean, so what's like the percentage ratio of those that are bogus versus those that actually turn out to be haunted?
What I do, I'll hear the ghost story and then I'll go and research the history. So around about 90% of the buildings I research, I'll find like a death, a murder, suicide, suspicious circumstances, or an historical report on ghosts in the property. For a lot of them, you won't find anything. The problem we have at the minute, not so much now, but maybe 4 or 5 years ago, there was a lot of quote unquote psychics that would make up history of buildings just to get events there, just to make money. And you'd find that people would read these stories and think they were true.
Yeah.
So as an historian, when you go and research them, I remember one that was saying it was a place where Bob Carvers used to have a factory just off Ezel Road. They called it the Ropery. And the claims that were circulating at the time is that it was where ropes were made to hang people. If you know anything about the history of Hull, the executions were done in Hull Prison. They were done with ropes that were in Hull Prison. They didn't need this building to make ropes. And the story of them making ropes for that purpose was made up. They were made for ships and rigging.
Yeah.
Another one was on Ferrens Way. There was a property. It used to be Herbies, just opposite St Stephen's. They claimed that their basement was used as an overspill morgue during World War II. If you know anything about the history of Hull, the main mortuary was Albert Avenue. There was the central mortuary, which is where the Trinity burial ground is, which has all been dug up for the new roadway.
Yeah.
There was one at Edham Road in the cemetery there, and then there was one at Old Royal Infirmary. So they wouldn't have needed one. And also as well, if you have a dead body with rigor mortis, how are you going to get it downstairs into a basement? It just doesn't make sense. So you get a lot of these stories where people have made up the history.
Yeah.
And you find that a lot in Hull. We have kind of like a fake narrative running right through.
It's really strange, isn't it? Really strange that happens. But yeah, I just always sort of like wondered like how many of these places you actually investigate actually turn out to be
some of them are just nonsense. And then there's a lot of them, you know, I've been to shops and stuff where they've experienced stuff. And they've sort of said to me, we've never really talked, but we've never really told anybody. And we'll go in and you'll see on CCTV stuff moving. I remember there was a shop on Oldness Road where on the first aisle, a woman had dropped down dead of a heart attack.
Whoa.
And on CCTV, people had seen stuff moving around. But in the morning when staff had gone in, they'd find stock from 4 or 5 aisles away thrown at the bottom of the first aisle. Like, and how is that possible? Like, stuff like that blows me away.
Yeah.
There was another shop where staff had gone in the morning and they'd found stock thrown all over the shop floor. And it wasn't like this had just fallen. It was like this had literally been grabbed, walked around 3 or 4 aisles
and then thrown in.
And when stuff like that happens, that's just amazing. So we'll go in, we'll do a blessing, try and reassure them and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it'll all be done after hours when it's all closed and dark and there's no one around. But yeah, there's quite a lot of shops in Hull.
Yeah.
They've reported stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's fascinating. I mean, like, just Well, actually, I mean, we'll quickly touch on this because then Lee's just got some a couple of questions he wants to ask you about some sort of like folklore type stuff. But I'll ask you real quickly because are you of the belief? Do you believe that a place can only really be haunted if something has happened there, or because some people believe that, say, like, someone lived in a house, but then they got taken to hospital and they sadly passed away. That person's ghost or spirit has returned to that property which they loved and adored, and they had a lot of love for their home. Or do you feel like a place can only really be haunted if that person died in that house?
The first one, the way I describe it, right? Do you remember this is a spoiler alert if anyone's not seen Titanic, but in like the last 5 minutes of Titanic where Rose dies and goes back to the Titanic, I describe it like that.
Right.
We go to the place where I believe that we enjoyed spending time.
Yeah.
But a large percentage of the time, these locations I'll research and find deaths. So it's kind of both sides of the coin, really.
Yeah.
Okay. So coming back, I think it's involved with some of your books. Certainly, there's been some other sort of urban legends, folklore type stuff that's been reported around Hull. So our last episode of Beyond the Veil, we covered the sort of legend or stories or encounters with the black-eyed children, which is something that's always sort of terrified me. And on one of your tours, I think by one of the cemeteries, there was an experience of somebody in a car that sounded like it was a black-eyed children encounter, to the point where I'd always been quite interested in it. That story that you then told piqued my interest more, and I looked into it a bit more. And then we were away at a cottage, and our friend told this story, a weird story that had happened while she was camping. And I instantly thought, wow, that sounds like... She didn't notice any black eyes, but it was black outside. But just this sort of kind of come in type thing, I'm looking for somebody. Just a really weird scenario, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the thing is as well, when she told the story, she just told it that it was a weird thing that happened to her. She never claimed it was black-eyed children. She was just like, she'd experienced something. She was like, oh, this real weird thing happened to us when we went camping a fair few years ago now. This happened. And Lee was just like, that sounds like black-eyed kids.
Yeah.
And it was a really, really strange thing. And we got talking about how on one of your tours you told us that story in Hull.
Yeah. So for the podcast, could you tell us that one again, and then any others that
yeah, so this is the story that basically opened up the gateway for the whole beast of Bamston Drain. Right. So a guy, I'd gone to college with this kid. I knew him from college. I knew his partner from college. So we'd kind of grown up together. And you sort of lose contact with people when you get older. And he works in the industry that does alarms for businesses. So he'd be on call out, and he'd go out and he'd check, make sure no one had broke into the property and adjust the alarm and so on. And that particular evening, I think it was a Saturday night, it was around the Beverley Road area, and he'd got a takeaway and he'd gone and sat on Skullcoats Lane, and he parked up near the cemeteries because it's dark and it's peaceful.
Yeah.
And he had his phone on his dashboard, and he was talking to his missus, and he was telling her about work and stuff like that, just having his, I think, burger and chips and a drink. And he was just sat with his light on in his van with the engine running. And he said out the corner of his eye, he noticed movement, and he looked across. And I think it was when he first told me this story, it was like the evening had been pretty warm. I think it had been like May time, something, so sort of spring period. And he had his windows down on his van. And he said, this kid just came to my side door. And he said, I was sat there and I looked across, and this boy was just stood there. And he said, two things that I remember. He said his clothes looked real shabby, but it was his eyes. He said his eyes looked lifeless. And this boy said, can I get in? And what he thought was weird was the door was unlocked and the window was down, so the kid could have got in. Yeah. And he said, I remember just feeling dread, like this should not be happening. And he said, I turned to the boy and said, no, And the boy said, please, can I get in? And he said, no. But he said, what, at that moment, everything was going on. He was not processing everything. What he realised was that the full vehicle was in darkness. So the light had gone off and the phone had gone off and the call had dropped and everything. And the vehicle had lost all power. And he said to this boy, I mean, we're in all, you know what it's like. He basically told him to F off. And this kid just disappeared. And with that, he turned and he realised that everything had gone off and then everything came back on, all the power was back on. He got his phone on, he rang his missus, and his missus was like, what the hell happened? She said, you was there 1 minute, you tilted your head and everything had gone off.
Whoa.
And I remember he basically driven home. He just basically rang his boss and said, I'm done. He'd gone home for the night, told his missus this story, what had happened to him. But he refused to contact me because he was so scared, he didn't want anyone to know. And she'd messaged me on Facebook the morning after and said to me, he's seen something and he's a bit worried. Can you speak to him? And I spoke to him and said, look, mate, we've all seen weird stuff. Like, you're not crazy.
Yeah.
Just tell me. And he told me the story firsthand. And from there as well, I've got this impression that he was bricking it. Like, he was really scared. So I put a post on Facebook saying, has anyone had any weird experiences on Skullcoats Lane? And I made sure it was an open-ended question, and I knew there'd be people, saying, oh, we've seen men in dresses and this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that was when I started getting messages about the Beast of Barmston Drain. Oh. So it sort of went from this black-eye ghost kid encounter to this weird story about the Beast of Barmston Drain, and the Beast of Barmston Drain took precedent over. But I remember when I worked at Needlers, which was on next to that cemetery, there was a guy called Paul who worked on security, and he said you used to hear children singing Ring a Ring of Roses in the cemetery and stuff like that. And of course, at the back is where the warehouse graves were and stuff. So I'd put that story in with those kids. I've never really investigated it or researched it any further. I've not heard from anyone else in that area that's encountered anything like that. But this guy he's got his head switched on. He's a no nonsense tradesman who is, if it's not black and white, it's not real. It's got to be. And I remember him saying to me, like, it really freaked me out, and he was quite worried about it.
But I think what is really amazing though is that black-eyed children are scared of people from Hull telling them to fuck off.
That as well.
So any advice to anyone in the world who happens to be listening to this, just develop a nice thick Hull accent and tell them to F off, and you'll be fine. That's the moral of this story, I feel.
It's funny though that story was it's just a textbook encounter that we discussed last time.
In later years, I did quite a lot of research into the Cannock Chase, black-eyed ghost kids and stuff like that, and they all have that similar sort of thing. But there was also cases in America where they were similar, where they'd come up to cars or they'd go to houses and ask to gain entrance. But yeah, man, he was freaked out. I mean, I've known this guy for years, and he was like, he basically said to me, I'm not going to stay out in my van anymore when I'm having a break. I'm going to go home.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to go and sit in somewhere that I can eat my food and not be in my van. It really freaked him out.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And I said to him, like, because he's quite fearless in his job. He goes to these properties where alarms are going off, potentially intruders in the building, because his client base, he's got quite a big client base, and he's not scared of anything.
Yeah.
So to see him like that was really, really weird. But then that Beast of Barmston Drain story took over, so that was it.
It is a classic black-eyed children. The whole power going out as well.
Yeah,
that is freaky as hell.
Because we did discuss that on the last episode, that the sightings and reported encounters of these things have reduced, and it seems to have coincided with people getting Ring doorbell type things, more CCTV around and stuff. But then you wonder, does it cause them to black out? There was one account of somebody who did have some sort of CCTV camera, did have this experience, and when he looked back, he was just talking to nobody visible on the camera.
Well, we saw that in Prospect Centre.
Yes, you told that story.
There was when I used to do the tours in Prospect Centre, after the tours, I'd often go to the security booth with a hot chocolate, and just have a bit of banter and talk about the night and what's happened. Because in there, I experienced a few things, and my guests experienced a few things. And I remember one night we were sat having hot chocolate, and a tradesman come in, and him and his colleague was painting the pipes in the car park at night because obviously it's quiet and there's no one around. And his colleague had radioed through and said, I've got a little girl with me and she can't find her mum and dad. And we got him on camera, and he was stood by himself, and he was like, I could see him holding his hand out, chatting, like to what looked like something was down there. And we radioed through and said, "You're on your own. There's no one there." And he's like, "No, there's a little girl here." So we was like, "Right, we're going to come and see you." So we all of us piled round, and he's on his own, no one there.
Jeez.
And then was like, "You need to come and see this." We took him back to the hut, showed him the footage. He shit himself and just basically said, "I don't want to be here anymore." And I remember he got in his van and left. And we was like, "How can you explain that?"
Yeah.
Like, he was adamant there was a little girl there looking for a mum and dad. So that was weird, because that, you'd think that'd be caught on camera. But yeah, at the same time, I've been in rooms with people that are filming, and they've seen something like a human walking across that room. But when they review the footage, it looks like a ball of light. There's nothing there. But I asked him, I said to him, like, why do you think the power went out? And his reckoning was, whatever that was, what was it? If it was drawing the energy. What if it was taking that at that moment? And I was like, yeah, that is pretty cool. It's a good theory.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've seen videos with paranormal investigators, and they'll have locked off cameras in places, and then they'll say, well, we've lost the footage of that particular area. We heard some noises. We've gone back to that camera, but the camera was completely dead. You'll never be able to believe us. We'll never be able to prove it. But the battery has completely been drained, even though it was fully charged for this particular event. But, the theory is that potentially activity has happened is because whatever entity or whatever it is has been in there has drained the battery for its use to manifest. So yeah, it does make you wonder, doesn't it? Yeah.
It does. Is there any? I know we've spoken slightly about the Beast of Barmston Dread. We can maybe go into more detail in a moment. But is there any other sort of folklore or urban legends based around Hull? I know you mentioned the Beverley Imp and things of that description.
White ladies. We've got a lot of white ladies in Hull.
Yeah.
There's lots of ghostly monks in Hull. Monks were when I first started out, everyone was talking about ghostly monks. Every pub had a ghostly monk. So there's stories like that. There's things like Arthur Lucan dancing around his grave. That was a story we was always told as kids. The Humber Monster, just all sorts. It's a weird and wonderful city. And a few years ago, I was asked to write an alternate A to Z of Hull that just included stories like that.
Oh, right.
And we started working on it we was going to do it as like a big art display with artists involved, and we just never got around to it. We created a big board with all the information on. We just never sort of filled it out.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, there's quite a lot of weird and wonderful stories like that.
So yeah, to go into a bit more detail, then can you tell us a bit more about Barmston Dread, what it is, and the supposed beast of Barmston Dread that lurks there?
After I'd put that post on social media asking out for stories, within the space of a few hours, I'd got independent eyewitnesses, about 6 or 7 originally, all claiming to have seen something on Barmston Drain, and some were saying it was just a hairy man, which, if you've been down Skullcoats Lane on a night, chances are it might be just a hairy man. Some said it was a dog, which again, it could be just a dog. But then there was quite a lot of them that were saying, well, it looked like a man that turned into a dog, and it jumped across the drain and all this kind of stuff. There was one couple that got in touch. Again, I knew them from working in the video shop. They were clients of mine that would come into the video shop. They informed me that they'd seen it on Reform Street, and they said it looked like it was eating a dog in the middle of the road, and they drove at it, beeping the horn, flashing the lights, and it ran and jumped over a 7-foot wall. So when the media heard that, they said that it was a 7-foot werewolf.
No.
So, and with a lot of the stories that came out initially, was the media just twisting. So I got in touch with newspaper reporters and said to them, I'm going to do an evening, come to Hull, I'm going to take you down the drain in the middle of the night, we're going to go find it. And I remember we had all these reporters turn up, there was photographers, Loads of minibuses all parked up near the MOT centre on Skullcoats Lane. We had a guy who, Charles Christensen, was a folklore expert. His other half, she's interested in wildlife and animal tracking and stuff. We walked down the drain and we got to where Northumberland Arms House is situated, and the path kind of goes down, and we walked down and we were stood on the drain's edge, and at the other side all the trees were like moving, and I pulled my torch out and shone it, and I saw these big green eyes looking across us, and I remember I put my thumb up and the eyes were at either side of my thumb, right across the other side of the drain, and then I said to Charles and his other half, "What do you think that is?" And they were like, stood next to me like, "We don't know." And with that, there was loads more trees moving. Another set of eyes appeared. So whatever it was, there was two looking at us. And I turned around to the assembled Welsh media, and they'd all done a runner. And they'd all gone back to the vans on Skullcoats Lane. And I remember we went back up to them and was like, "What the hell?" And there was like, "Oh, we've heard reports that it can jump across the water." And then the next day, the front page of like the Express and the Sun was like, "Last night we went to have a look and we found these big green eyes. We don't know what it is. We're all baffled." And it was mental. It went viral. I remember getting telephone calls from China, Japan, New Zealand, Australia, North America, South America, Canada. I was chatting to newspapers all over the world about this, and I was getting interviewed by radio stations. And then it seemed to die down, and then someone sent a Freedom of Information request to Humberside Police asking if they carry silver bullets. So then it grew again, and then it died down, and someone got in touch with Hull City Council and said, "Do you have a policy in place for when you capture it?" And at that time, the Lord Mayor of Hull, Councillor Steve Wilson, lived and still does live next to the cemetery on Skullcoats Lane. So he was like, "I can assure you we're doing it," so he was like, so he was like really, really like invested in it. And local rock band Black Kes did a rock operetta over at Adelphi. People were producing T-shirts, and I never saw a penny of any of this. There was even a beer. You could buy a Beast of Barmston Drain beer. There was a soap at one point. There was all sorts. And then it died down again. And then someone else claimed to have seen it. But all the sightings were between Reform Street and Skullcoats Lane, which if you've been down there, it's a small area. She claimed to have seen it out near Alsham. And no one really believed that because it was too far out. But then the media linked it in with Old Stinker, which is a werewolf legend from Flixton.
Yes, I've heard
So then the story got muddied a little bit. And then it died down, and I thought, that's it. Like, it's calmed down. And then some guy called Alice Cooper wrote on his blog that he wanted to come to Hull to look for a werewolf. And it went viral again. And I remember getting in touch with Alice Cooper's people and saying, if Mr. Cooper wants to come to Hull, I'll take him out to hunt for a werewolf. We had the Travel Channel, Discovery Channel, all these different media companies came. Hundreds of film students came, and I took them all out. We had a guy who wrote werewolf fiction who came, wanted to go for a look around. It was just bizarre. At one point we were doing a Vice TV came, there was a guy called Jake, and in the early evening when we went out during tea time and it was nice and bright, he just took the mick. And I said to him, when we come back later on, you're gonna change your attitude. We were walking along the drain and there was this commotion from the trees, and we heard this thud. And it was like a Sunday night, it was like midnight, it was pouring down the rain. We turned around, there was a man in shorts and t-shirt, just like stood in the tree line. And he turned around to me and he went, "Is that normal?" And I was like, to be honest, we're in Hull. It could be. So that was never questioned. We carried on walking, and we went into the cemetery, and we could smell the tanning yard. And because it stinks, an old stinker. It was like, "What's that?" I was like, "It's a tanning yard." He went, "Can you prove it?" "Well, no." So it was like, okay. And then it was a full moon, and then on Air Street, you could hear these two Alsatians howling. And the director came over to me and went, "For health and safety, we're calling it a night."
Oh, fuck.
And I was like, "What?" And so I thought when it came on, it was like they'd done it really well. It was quite light-hearted, but there was like, it was a bit scary. Yeah. And then we did a shoot with Travel Channel. He came over. we'd spent the Friday night, they'd hired out the upper floors of the Old White Hart. They'd got Black Heads to come and play the Beast of Barms from Drain song, and they gave us a free bar, which is like really, really nice. But the next day was like a 24-hour shoot. So I was hanging. They came for me really early in the morning. It was like, we're going to shoot from like sunrise until sunrise the next day. I was like,
Wow.
cool. And I remember we did some filming on Reform Street. We did some filming on Skullcoats Lane. And at one point, I was like, there was interviewing people in Skullcoats Lane Cemetery. And I was like, I'm just going to get my head down. And I remember just crawling under a bush. And there's a photo of me with my aviators on. I'm just sat there asleep under this bush while they're filming. And then they took us out for dinner. We filmed again. They took us out for tea, got like a 3-course meal and a couple of pants. But by then, you don't want to film anymore. But then they're like, we're going to go back and we're going to film. And I'm like, oh, man. And I remember we were being laid on it got to a point where it was like 2 or 3 in the morning. All your energy levels are gone. Me and the presenter were just laid on the drain, waiting for the sun to come up. And he's like, what do you think it is? I'm like, man, I don't know. At this point, I don't care. At this point, I do not give a shit what it is. And it was really funny, but there was a bit where we was walking around and I was doing a piece to camera and I was walking backwards and I fell in a grave. And I was more bothered about the fact that I might have broke my leg. The camera crew zoomed in on my foot, which was like in the grave, and noticed there were claw marks on the grave.
Really?
So that freaked them out a little bit. Because in Flixton, the story is that the werewolves dig bodies out of cemeteries.
Yeah.
So they were worried about that. And then there was a bit where we was walking through the cemetery, there was a big pile of excrement. And just for health and safety and people that are wearing trainers, I was like, guys, watch your feet. There's a big pile of excrement. The camera started like moving all over and the director's on the floor sniffing it and stuff like that.
Oh, my God.
So yeah, it was just crazy. It was just a really crazy period. And then the most surreal evening, Reverend Peter Laws, he has his own podcast, really, really popular. He was producing a book called The Frighteners. And he contacted me and said, I want to spend some time in Royal Station Hotel with you and some time investigating the Beast of Barmston drain. So I was all suited and booted. We'd gone down the drain, and I remember we were walking up to Skullcoats Lane, and he turned to me real serious. He said, have you ever brought steak on a werewolf hunt? And I said, no, because steaks are for vampires, aren't they? And he went, no. And he brought out this real big, nice bit of peppered steak. And I was like, what's that for? And he was like, I want you to pull it behind you on a bit of string. And I was like, really? He was like, yeah, it'll be a great chapter in the book. It'll be hilarious. So it's a Saturday night. All my mates are at pub. Like, you can hear all the pubs in the distance. I'm walking down the drain wearing a suit. It's pouring down my rain. I'm pulling a bit of dead meat out. And I thought, if someone comes now and the dog walking and sees me, they're just going to think it's just like, what is this kid doing? And I took a picture and I posted it on Facebook. And I was expecting people to say, like, you idiot. But people were commenting saying, go careful.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my God.
It shows the fascination with it, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that's clearly the power of the belief behind it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember like thinking, this is the most surreal experience of my life, but because of the job that I do, this is just another night in the office.
Yeah.
This is like what I've become.
You're no different to the guy on the other side of Barmston Drain in a t-shirt and shorts, hiding in the bush. Yeah. You're that guy.
But there was weird. I remember one night we'd been filming. We did this introduction scene where we were on Fountain Road Bridge, and he's at one side of the bridge, I'm at the other. They've got a drone flying, and we're supposed to walk over and shake each other's hand. And then they get the drone, put it away. We film it again for a camera that's at ground level, and then we do the audio. And there was a box at the side of the bridge. And this was like my starting position. There was a box, and I was like, "This is weird. Like, who leaves a box on a bridge?" And I opened it up, and there was loads of pizzas, like cooked pizzas, about 10 cheese and tomato pizzas in this box. And so we walked over, we did the bit, we shake hands, then we do it again for the camera. We shake hands, do the introduction. Then I said to them, "This is really weird, right? But there's a box of cooked pizzas down by the spot where about 6 people have seen this creature." Do you not think that's a bit fucking weird? Like, what is someone feeding it pizzas?
Yeah.
Like, why are all these pizzas? here?
Margaritas as well.
Yeah,
yeah,
they
the
smell
meat
it.
things.
They smell really, really nice. You can smell the garlic. You know, I'm quite tempted at this point. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was so much surreal
Oh my
weirdness.
God, yeah, that
so
is.
much.
Yeah, that's crazy. I think what we'll do, Lee, is we'll just ask the question about UFOs, and then we'll get you to wrap up with
Yeah, cool.
your. We was thinking it'd be good to wrap up with your story about your son.
All right,
You know,
cool.
you know that
Yeah.
you wrap up with your tour.
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
that
yeah,
all right?
yeah.
We was gonna ask you to, about our house, but we'll I think we'll leave it because it's actually we've done just over 2 hours now. So yeah, I think if we do just ask a quick question about the UFOs, and then we'll wrap up with that, and then we'll leave it there. Brilliant. All right.
So yeah, just to move on to a bit of a different area of the paranormal. Over the years, fascination me and Brett have shared, and we've actually seen a few things that we're unable to explain. So how rich is Hull and East Yorkshire for UFO sightings?
Oh, very. So, how far back do you want to go? I mean, I uncovered one recently. I don't know how much I can say about it because it's all a bit stum, but I found a UFO sighting over Hull and the Humber in the 1600s.
Wow.
Which was
Whoa.
pretty. So I'd previously written about one in 1801, where this craft had descended on the Humber and split into four, and then regrouped and flew off, which I thought was weird. But this is from the 1600s. This was soldiers in the garrison had seen this weird light in the sky, and it had come down, and it was so bright. It said they could read newsprint in the middle of the night, and it hovered, and then it flew off. And so that's quite interesting.
Whoa.
The Humber's always been a hotbed. 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. People have seen stuff. There was a really good case, 1960s, in the National Archives. Police officers stationed near the Humber, up near Hessel, had seen a craft, and it was flying north. So they contacted Hessel Police Station that sent all their officers outside, and they all looked up and saw it. And they put a wireless transmission out to say, look up to the skies, guys. And a line of police officers between the Humber all the way to Beverley were all stood out looking at this craft. Don't know what it was, and they wrote to the Ministry of Defence, and they said, we don't know what it is. We think it could be a satellite or a rocket. But these guys are trained observers. So that was fascinating.
Wow.
So there's quite a lot from this area.
Yeah.
And people have been reporting them for years. And I think a lot of the reasons why is, if you look at Great Britain on a map, the Humber's such a big area that, like, if I'm going somewhere, I'll look for a pinpoint where I can aim for. If I'm flying in, that to me is a big pinpoint. You know. But yeah, pretty much back in the 90s when UFO magazine used to get published, pretty much every issue had a picture of Humber Bridge with a UFO in the background.
Yeah.
Because it was just like people would take pictures of the bridge and see these weird craft. And then when you look at the area that we're in, we have a lot of military bases in the area. There was a lot of ROC posts and stuff like that, a lot of bunkers.
Yeah.
So there's all that to contend with as well. And I don't know if they're coming from other worlds or other dimensions or from under the sea or if it's just us. I have no idea. But I got into this because when I was 8, I saw a UFO over Hull.
Yeah.
And I remember the morning after I was speaking to my dad, and he gave me a book of the unexplained, and that was where my passion began. All those years ago. And to this day, I still don't know what it was. It looked like a big bright egg. But since then, I've done some research and found that year, over Hull, people were seeing big bright eggs. And this was before the police helicopter. But obviously, to the north of us, we've got RAF Leconfield, where they used to have the Sea Kings.
Yeah.
So it could be something like that. But yeah, that's what really got me into it.
Yeah, I did a sort of ghost hunt. It was billed as a bit of a charity thing at RAF Hampton, the nuclear bunker. And the poor chap who was sort of showing us around and looking after us absolutely was not interested in ghosts or anything. Completely, just very, very no nonsense. Still worked for the RAF, but he just kind of looked after that. I think he was semi-retired. sort of thing. And anytime anyone asked him any questions about ghosts around the bunker, he would just shut it down, just wasn't interested. The minute we asked him about a UFO, he had loads of stories to tell.
I bet.
When they thought there was one time they literally thought there was a missile going down the coast because something was travelling so fast, and all of these points picked it up, and then it just completely changed direction and went the other way. And suddenly, well, that's definitely not a missile, and nothing goes that fast. And then suddenly changes direction and goes at an equally fast speed. I think they had some issue of somebody taking off from nearby in a plane that then crashed into the sea, and then they never recovered the body. But
that sounds like
the thing was still closed, and
that sounds like
fasten with some.
It was in a lightning and it crashed off Flamberhead.
Yeah, and I think he said something along the lines of the sort of hatch thing closed with wing nuts, and they were still fastened, but the guy was just nowhere to be found.
Wow.
So I always found that really fascinating. So I sort of had an idea that Hull was pretty rich for it, but it's fascinating to think as far back as the 1600s.
Yeah.
Something's been reported.
You've done a book on it, haven't you?
I've written a few. Yeah. Funnily enough, I've got one coming out about Mr. Schaffner.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I've got access to quite a lot of files that have never been made public. So,
wow.
But yeah, I've written quite a few on the UFO subjects. I've written about Hull, East Yorkshire, and North Yorkshire. And I've got access to quite a lot of the files from the archives and stuff like that, which have never been published. So that was really nice. And going back to sort of the 80s, there was a local MP called Sir Major Patrick Wall, who represented Alton Price. And it just so happened he worked for the British UFO Research Association. So he was a man that would go to the Parliament from Hull asking about UFOs all the time. Wow. His archives are at the History Centre, so I got access to all them.
Wow.
So really interesting guy. So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I think before we bring this episode to an end, and it's been absolutely fantastic speaking to you. There's a million other things I'd love to ask you, but I think what I'd like to do though is ask you to round off this episode with a story that you usually end your tours with, and I'd like to ask you to tell a story which is a personal story to you, something that happened in it's either a house you used to live in or you still do. I can't remember.
Still there.
And it involves your son.
Yeah. So we moved into the property a week before the Hull floods. Within a couple of days of living in there, my son woke up screaming, and I went to see what was the matter, and he said there was someone stood at his door with a bit of wood, banging it in his hand. A couple of days later, my daughter woke up. She was really curious about this old lady that sang songs to her and tucked her into bed on a night. And I just rubbished both of them and said, look, just your imagination. You've probably been watching too much TV or reading too much. And then a couple of days later, my eldest woke up again. He was screaming. I ran into his room and went, what's up? And he was shaking his head. He was terrified. And I asked him a couple of times what was the matter, and he couldn't tell me. So I leaned in to give him a hug. And as he leaned in, we moved towards each other. He whispered in my ear and he went, it's behind you. And I remember I spun round and there was no one there, but I shit myself. And I remember thinking, I need to go research this. And I went to the local studies library, which was at Central Library at the time, and a thing called the Hull Times Index. And I was reading through it, and it gave this under the chapter of murder. It said there was a murder on 7th Street, which is where I live in East Hull. So I thought, it'd be pretty cool to print these off, just to talk, like a conversation piece with my dad and my mum. They'd lived down the street for years. My sister and her kids lived down there. And I printed them off. And I went on the British Newspaper Archive and started getting loads of stuff off there. And then I got to one report and it said, murder charge in East Hull. Hull woman dead, bloodstained axe found near body. And the first paragraph, it gave the address, which was my house. On April 1st, 1945, Fred Watson, who was a fitter and a lodger, came home from work and he killed Mrs. Garbutt. She was in the living room in a rocking chair and he put the axe through her head 6 times. He dragged the body into the back room and switched the gas taps on. Tried to gas himself, and that failed. He got a rusty knife and cut his wrists. But again, that failed. They arrested him and took him to the Beverley Road Hospital, and he escaped, and he was an idiot. He probably could have claimed sanctuary in Beverley if he'd got to the Minster, but he never ran into Hull. And back then, Norfolk Street Police Station was there. So they just walked to the top and arrested him again, sent him back to the hospital, bandaged him up, sent him to the police courts where they said he was guilty but insane, and he was sent to Delapole Hospital. And when he got to Delapole, he cut his own throat with a rusty knife. So the house is linked to a murder and a suicide, but then all the newspaper reports said that the victim was a widow, which suggests that she's been married and her husband's died. Now, this was 1945, so my initial thought was he was killed in the war. And I went and researched, again in the British Newspaper Archive, I just put my address in. And in 1929, Mr. Ernest Garbutt left the property and was never seen alive again. His body was pulled from the Humber, and it looked like he'd been beat up and thrown in. So it's linked to a murder, a suicide, and a suspicious death. So we got the local church. They couldn't help us, so they put us in touch with the Diocese of York, who sent their exorcist, you want to call him. And he turned up and did a blessing. He basically said that there's a man with an axe who wants to kill you and your kids. So I said, he can piss off. He said, but Mrs. Garbutt likes your house and your kids. She's happy she can stay. So sometimes you get like the smell of lavender. It's not scary. I'm there this weekend by myself. It doesn't bother me at all in the slightest. And it is a nice place to live. You know, I've got a cat. He's real chilled out. But a few years ago, I got loads of equipment to go and do golden fleece with. And I wanted to test it in my own house. So I walked into the living room where Bradley was sat. And my eldest is a geneticist. He's the president of the York Biology Society, super intelligent. He sent me pictures today of larvae from mosquitoes or something. He takes DNA from these things, and you know, he's a super intelligent kid. But again, he's sort of a typical teenager. He's got no common sense.
You usually find that with highly intelligent people. They don't always have the best common sense.
He was sat there, and I walked in with the EMF detector, and he said, "What's that?" I said, "Right, picks up on ghosts." And he went, "Yeah, whatever." And I said, "Well, let's try it then, shall we?" You know, and I said, "Is there anyone here? Can you make it go red?" And I moved it towards him. It went red. So I said, "Mrs. Garbutt, are you here?" And it moved it towards him. It went red. So I said, "Did you live here?" And it went red. "Did you die here?" It went red. I said, "Was you murdered?" And it went red. So I was asking all these questions to build up to confirm basically the research that I'd done. And then I said to Bradley, like, we should ask for Fred. And by this point, he's like trying to work out, you know, is it theory of relativity? Is it energy? He was coming up with all these theories. And I said, "Fred, can you hear me?" And it went to red. "Fred, can you see me?" And I moved it towards him. It went to red. I said, "Did you live here, Fred?" And it went to red. And then when the priest had come, he'd said that Fred wanted to kill the kids. So I said to Bradley, "We should ask Fred direct if you want to kill the kids." So I said, "Fred, do you want to kill Bradley?" And I moved it towards him real slow. And it just crept all the way up to red. And Bradley's face just drained of colour. And he was like, "Dad, how is that possible?" And I said, "I'll tell you, son." I said that when I move it towards you, I'm not moving it towards the afterlife or Mrs. Garbutt. I'm not moving it towards Fred. When I move this device towards you, I'm moving it towards the Wi-Fi box that's behind your head. And it was just so funny. You know,
such a cruel prank.
Yeah,
such a cruel prank.
But it just goes to show how easily you can hoodwink people. And this is an intelligent kid. You know, he was super intelligent.
Yeah.
But
Great.
yeah, it's really funny because for years and years I've told that story, but I kept it sort of from the kids.
Yeah.
And then as they've grown older, I've kind of told them. And I remember one day I'd gone upstairs and my little boy, I mean, he's 13 now, but at the time he must have been about 10. He was out front and there was just this gang of 10-year-old boys and they was all sat in a semicircle and he was stood at the front and he was like, "And now I'm going to tell you the story about the murder house." And just started telling them this story. And I'm like, "Oh my God." Like,
Nobody got a family business going now. Yeah. Brilliant. That's it's a great story. I mean, especially the fact that like this started with your son, you know, which a lot of people would probably dismiss as bad dreams and all that kind of stuff. But then you've got that history that immediately
because
just backs it up.
because I mean, this wasn't like an immediate process. This went on for quite some time. We thought it was night terrors. I remember we spent a lot of time at the doctor's discussing night terrors and nightmares and stuff like that. And he was adamant I'm definitely sitting there. No, you're not.
Yeah.
And then it was happening. And then when I did the research, I was like, God, yeah, maybe he's telling the truth.
Exactly.
And I've been dismissing him all this time.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder how many stories are out there that are put down to something
definitely.
else.
Yeah,
exactly.
my mum used to be, when I was younger, my mum used to be dead against me researching and reading about stuff like this. And then one night she called me up. She was outside of work. She worked at Princess Royal on Salt House. And she rang me up and she was like, there's a big ball of light in the sky and it's just hovering. And I was like, what do you think it is? And she was like, it's not making any noise or anything. It's really big. So I was like, what do you think it is, Mum? She was like, I think it's a UFO. I was like, there you go. Like, you've seen something. You've not been possessed by the devil. You've not opened any portals up. Everything's okay. It's just a big light in the sky.
Yeah.
And she went on. She's experienced loads of stuff when she was working at the hospitals and things. But yeah, I think people just get worried that you're going to get like possessed or all that kind of stuff.
And I think, like, you said earlier, like, it's also a case of, it goes the other way as well, is that sadly people just do not want to open up about this stuff because they're also just so worried about just being called weird, idiots and all the rest of it. And it's just like, well, if you can't explain it, then just tell us exactly what it is and let everyone else make up the mind. Don't matter what, you just tell us what but people are just so worried about what people will think of them.
Yeah,
I always found it fascinating. We've touched on this on almost every episode, but it's the thing of people can be supposedly absolute non-believers, and then you say to them, "Do you want to do a Ouija board?" They'll, no, I do not. Do you want to go to this haunted house or insult this haunted doll? No, I don't. But I don't believe in any of it. But no, I'm not doing.
I've met people from very upstanding walks of life who were like, no, I don't believe in it, and then they'll proceed to tell you stuff that's happened to them when they were young. And I'm like, right, okay, so what do you think that is then? I've had so many weird and wonderful stories from people.
Exactly. Well, listen, Mike, I mean, like I just said a minute ago, I could talk and ask you questions all night. My only hope is that we can maybe get you back on the show another time, because it's been absolutely fantastic speaking to you, and I'm sure you'll say the same, Lee. I've still got so many questions I'd love to ask.
Absolutely.
Places and things like that, but as I said at the start of the show as well, like, we're so grateful to have you on here, because again, we're only just starting, and it's been great to have you on.
No, my pleasure.
No, it really has. We really are very, very grateful. So we touched on earlier about your books, and obviously we're still you're still at a point where you're trying to get those back into get them published again. But if you keep me up to date,
definitely.
I'll mention it on an episode at some point in the future that they are available for anyone that's caught this episode and is interested in picking your books up. Just tell me, and I'll happily let people know.
When they are ready. Anyway, there's loads of cases. There's stuff that I've investigated in these books that's never really been touched on before. So when they are launched, there will be a big. You will get to know about it, definitely.
Brilliant. I can't wait to read them. I want to get my hands on them and have a good sort of pour over them, because they'll make for some fantastic stories. And thank you so much for joining us. And it's been fantastic. We'll definitely be joining you on another tour sometime soon as well.
Come along.
I'd recommend it to anybody listening as well. So it's amazing Hull tours into Mike. So.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. If you're local to Hull, or you can travel to Hull, you said you're not on social media.
I've got people looking after amazing old tours.
Have you?
So so people can
active Facebook page for that one.
Okay, cool.
And hopefully between now and Christmas, I was doing some more in Cottingham and Hessel and places like that. I've got one coming up in Hull next week, and then kind of flips over then, and I got a lot of private bookings and stuff. But people are more than welcome to check them out. And
great stuff. So amazing Hull tours was that? On Facebook. So go check that out. And as I said, if you're not local to Hull but you can travel, get on them because it's fantastic to get on them. So interesting, absolutely fascinating. But yeah, I think that's where we're going to leave it there. So thank you so much once again. But for the meantime, it's goodbye from Mike.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Goodbye from Lee.
Goodbye.
And goodbye from me. But whether you are from Hull or just visiting, the streets of Hull may look quiet at night, but beneath the cobblestones and whispers of the past, something still stares. From ghostly figures on the docks to restless spirits in forgotten halls, history, it seems, never really lets go. Our thanks to historian and paranormal researcher Mike Covell for guiding us through Hull's haunted past and present. A reminder that even in the places we know best, the unknown is never far away. So until next time, keep your lights low, your mind open, when we dare to look once again beyond the veil.